Wall Street and biotechnology companies have been very excited about this idea. And what essentially it is trying to hack the cells in the body in order to make them into drug factories.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Saturday, April 3rd, 2021. Thank you for joining me today. Sort of excited about today's show. There's a lot to get into, but there's a lot of really important things to go over. Things that kind of add to previous stories we've discussed, as well as investigations and research that we've been doing in regard to things like masks and where this is all leading. Excuse me, where it seems that now they're beginning to taper the narrative in a way that either justifies what we've always been saying, but pointing to somebody else, or kind of allowing us to understand that they're slowly letting this, but understand when I was going to say slowly letting this release, like letting us go back to normal, even though that's not what it is. It's never about letting go entirely. The biosecurity state they've created is not going anywhere. It's about releasing the grip that they will always have on you, but not as tight. That's the whole point. But we're going to talk about vaccines a little bit today, quite a bit, in regard to some side effects and research from the actual trials that show an alarming reduction in fertility that I'm sure will shock many people here today. We will talk about something actually to start in regard to foreign policy that you might find very interesting, that as always relates to the larger discussion. But as you can see in the title today, some unnerving stuff about government being able to stick their hands into the current live streaming like we're doing right now and jump in with their own narrative for public service announcements. And this is something that's already being discussed and right now in the 2021 NDAA, which we've discussed many times. Always the way they sneak in these things under the guise of fighting for you, which absolutely chop away at every right and everything you think makes you an American. Let's put it that way. Now, it's horrifying to think about, but as well as something that I think I might have actually talked about before. In any case, it was equally alarming again to read about something that was passed in New York in January 2021 about detention centers, or not centers, excuse me, about detaining people. And of course, they need places to do that. And this is something that is coming from a person that is under investigation now, or I guess you can call it that. I doubt this person's ever going to be held accountable for shoving elderly people into nursing homes, and which absolutely 100% led to their death. And this is what's happening in New York City. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a lot more than just that. So make sure you stay tuned. We have a lot to get into today that you will find important. Now we're going to start off. Oh, actually, and before I even do that, I think it's kind of exciting. This is what took me an extra moment to get live today. It looks like we are officially live streaming on Odyssey right now. It looks like we were invited to try their beta version of their live stream, which is fantastic. So if you're on YouTube right now and you don't want to be there, Odyssey's another place you can go right now for free and watch it somewhere else. I highly recommend you do. Otherwise, let's get into the show. Now let's start with something that, some of the notes, but foreign policy in particular is what we're going to start with, but some of the notes around interesting things here. Actually, this was, so this is actually something that's going to make you laugh. A couple of these points in the beginning probably will make you laugh. And I just had to point this out. This is actually an article from Michael Tracy, but it's more about the point that he's discussing. As he says, traumatized journalists, oh my gosh, are now declaring themselves a marginalized group. And, we've seen this coming already, right? That we've already seen this where they tried to make it as some kind of a protected class where you're not allowed to. It's just, these are, talk about snowflakes. I mean, do you realize what line of work you're in? Like, do you realize that you're in an adversarial, very contentious line of work where your whole job is to put yourself in positions like this, to be the person that is being called out or attacked by the other? You're supposed to be disclosing people's secrets and important things for people to know. Like people have said in the past, if you are not being attacked, you're not doing your job as a journalist. It's just so insulting that this is what has become of what we're told as journalism today. Not even close to what it is. They're stenographers. I mean, this is why this is happening, because they know Well, you see what they are. And here's what's written in the actual discussion. He says this is the real proposal in the new blockbuster report outlining sweeping recommendations to aid allegedly traumatized journalists. Traumatized journalists. My God, it just makes me laugh. And I'm not even trying to be insensitive. Like, for someone that's actually traumatized, you would not hear that from me. But from somebody who is doing a job and doing it poorly and then being attacked for doing that and acting like they're being attacked because they're a journalist and claiming to be traumatized about that, sad and pathetic. To its credit, it says the report occasionally feigns that hypothetical concern. Actually, let me just jump to the part where it's highlighted. One of the hottest takes found in the report is the recommended creation of an SOS button that would allow journalists, which I would argue you wouldn't call them that if this was in place, to instantly activate in-platform protections, as well as an emergency hotline providing personalized trauma-informed support in real time because somebody criticized you online. You know, this is insulting to people who are actually traumatized. But that's what this is. What this is right now. They're trying to create this air. Now, here's what's actually happening. What they want you to think is these people are out there fighting for truth and they're being attacked by people like us, and it's traumatizing them. But what's really happening is they're out there lying to you, misrepresenting the reality, and we call them out for it, and they don't like that. So that's what this is. It's just insulting to us that this is what has become of what they tell us are the elite journalism. Well, here's another funny thing that should make you laugh out loud. Pete Buttigieg, his dog and pony show. He uses an armored SUV, a Suburban, to bring a bike in the car where he, gets close distance to where he's supposed to be going, unloads the bike and a security detail, and pretends to be using a bike to get to work.
On a bike in his suit. On a bike in his suit. Riding away.
Right. So what you're seeing is Pete Buttigieg pulling a bike out of the back of the Suburban after he gets close enough to where he's supposed to be going and pretending to be biking the whole way as his team outfits him. and even more funny is you'll notice is not only does he have a team of people with him, but they continue to follow him in the car, which makes so it's just about doing a PR stunt. But we all know this. That's what these people are. They're not real. And that's the whole thing. That going back to the point to begin with. That's why they don't want us pointing it out, because they are all fake. They're pretending to be what you want them to be or what they think you want them to be. In no sense do they ever care about actually being what they want you to be, as opposed to pretending to be or caring about what you actually want. It's just pathetic. And here he goes. Hooray, now look, he's saving the world to drive. But here, this is the best part. Take note of how the cars continue to follow him. So is this just him pretending to be riding a bike? Or is it actually about riding a bike to save the environment? And if it is, how do you justify having a team of cars follow you? It's just pathetic. And this is the problem with all of these people, is that a lot of people invested in the two-party illusion. They think these people are good people fighting for you. If this person was believing in what he was doing, why would he have to pretend to do it? These people are politicians that will lie about anything if it gets your support. And as this person says, I don't really see any problem. Politicians around the world are prone to do PR stunts. What people should keep an eye on is their policy track record. This is what really matters. Now, that's true. But the problem is that it's not okay to be like, yeah, they all fake stuff. Isn't that the problem in and of itself, that we're okay with the fact that they pretend and lie and cheat and steal, and then we simultaneously act like when they do what we like, that they're good people? They're fakes. They're faking everything. And this is what we need to recognize. It's not just Pete Buttigieg. It's not just left or right. It's the whole damn government and politics around the world, for that matter. If we can just recognize that, this wouldn't be so easy. If we just simply stood back and said, we don't care about your petty squabbles. We want results. As Americans, here's what we want, individually speaking, right? And then ultimately they produce. But the problem is, what happens now is they go, well, the Republicans wanted this and they wouldn't allow this, or the Democrats wouldn't allow this. And so then we get the people pointing at the other side and going, we wanted this, but the Democrats wouldn't allow it, or the Republicans would. Not the government, you see, but a part of it. And see, as long as they get you only focusing on one part of the whole picture, you won't actually be able to change anything, which is the point. So when we finally recognize that your government is the one failing you, not one part of it, maybe we can move forward. Now, moving into a little foreign policy, this is something that's been shared by quite a few people. This is am I the only one that sees this, by the way? This happens to me all the time. And by the way, these tweets aren't gone. I even pointed this out in something that I shared the other day. Here's the tweet, right? So the tweet's there, but when you look at the actual location, at least on my screen anyway, it says tweet unavailable. I am convinced this is happening either on only certain people's views, but in general to help slow down the flow of information, essentially. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I keep noticing that, and it's strange. But then you look back later and it'll be there all of a sudden. It's just odd. I think it's malicious. I really do. I don't think it's just a glitch. In any case, the point is, here's the tweet. Dr. Khalid, PhD, a lot of PhDs out there that don't seem to know very much. Syria has less than 1% of the oil reserves in Saudi Arabia. Mexico has more oil. Well, actually, you know what we should do for the sets. I'm not reading it because I wasn't showing, but let's read this first. Here's what Sarah said. AOC talks about imperialism, but still hasn't uttered a single word about Biden's bombing of Syria and daily theft of Syrian oil. Now, those things are 100% happening. A child could see that this is happening. Are the US government bombing Syria? Of course they are. Or through other people? Yes, obviously. Or absolutely in either sense. But are they also taking oil? I have proven to you on this show. I've shown you the trucks driving out with truck after truck after truck. Now, that's a fact. Understand that. This is absolutely happening. I've even shown you the videos of U.S. people around it saying we're protecting the oil. Well, and let's just even put it this way. It's 100% being moved because we've already shown you U.S. personnel discussing how this is being sold or given to the Kurds. But in any case, even if it's just sitting there and being quote unquote protected, it's the same concept. Okay. So now going back to the tweet. Syria has less than 1% of oil reserves of Saudi Arabia. Mexico has more oil than Syria. Okay, so far, none of that has anything to do with the fact that those two things are happening. That was the only thing that was being discussed. Okay, let's continue. Syria produces 24,000 barrels per day, while Saudi Arabia produces 12 million and Mexico produces 2. Okay, so does the fact that Saudi and Mexico have more oil mean anything whatsoever to the fact that this is being stolen from Syria and that they're being bombed? Okay, but see, this is what's called a false equivalency or a straw man. She says nobody is nor wants to steal any oil from Syria. Okay, well, that's a really ignorant statement because a lot of people want to steal that. How about just the average person that might want to take something that's worth money? Okay, so nobody's obviously a really dumb thing to say. Now let's talk about governments. Are we really pretending that there are not governments out there that want to steal other resources? Whether that's because any resource, whether or not you have an abundant source elsewhere is still worth money, or because taking those resources hinders the production of the government you're trying to manipulate. Gee, I must be the most intelligent person in the world, or this PhD does not know what they're talking about, or they just don't care because they have a narrative or a political side. In any case, I don't think it's the first one because I think this is basically obvious and it's not too hard for me to recognize this or that other people can see it plainly. So I think it's either that they don't know what they're talking about or this person's lying to you. In any sense, it's crazy that this is what we're getting and people pretend like they're so intelligent about, and look, they're just Islamic meme maker, yeah, this clearly somebody, PhD, and guess what? Artificial intelligence. Shocker. I just find that ridiculous, but here's what I said. This just demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of U.S. foreign policy. Profit is a huge part of this, whether 1% or 10%. Profit is profit. I don't know why that's difficult for people to wrap their mind around. But this is, by and large, about starving Syrians, government and civilians alike, of their own resources. Quite simple and apparent, really. Don't know why that's hard for some people to wrap their mind around. That's why I think she's probably just gaslighting people. Anyway, the reality is Biden and likewise Trump as well, they were and are currently stealing everything they can from Syrian people, burning wheat fields as well, by the way, which is also easily proven. But people just don't care about facts anymore. Over into another interesting story from in regard to specifically the Pentagon in regard to Afghanistan, but also just other fields of illegal war that the U.S. government's involved in. This is actually saw this in the Jimmy Dore show. Pentagon could open itself to costly litigation from contractors if U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan this year. Now, I'd like to go into a little more detail and give you my opinion on this. It says, despite the signing of the Doha Agreement, which is the agreement between the U.S. government and the Taliban, which I want you to recognize as we just read through what CNN is saying, that it's apparent on its face that the US government is happy to sign agreements, even if they almost know certainly that they will not be able to meet them. Does this speak to honesty or true intent? Or does it speak to just saying whatever you need to say to get what you want? And then maybe follow through on your end, most likely not. Right? This is the modus operandi for the US government. History shows that quite clearly. Anyway, you'll see what I mean as we go through this. Despite the signing of the Doha Agreement last February that called for a full drawdown of US troops and personnel from Afghanistan by May 1st, the Department of Defense issued nearly $1 billion in contracts to 17 different companies related to work in Afghanistan past the withdrawal date. Okay, so right off the bat, they signed an agreement about being out by May 1st. The signing with the Taliban, this whole thing is contingent on following through with this obligation. And they simultaneously issued 17 different contracts for billions of dollars and and clearly they must know the dates for those contracts go well past what they've already committed to being out of there by May 1st. It's just this on its face. I mean, what do you think that whether it's the Taliban, a terrorist group that they previously said were the most dangerous in the world, they're now dealing with, or anybody else? What does that look like to you? Somebody who doesn't care about meeting what they said they would. It says there are currently some 18,000 contractors in the country, of which 6,350 are American citizens. Now, here is something that they, I guess, let slip because they're discussing the contractor discussion and maybe hope you don't pick up on the reality of what that means. 18,000 contractors. Meaning that those are people that are there on the behest of the U.S. government and committing acts of war or whatever else they're committing them to do. They're all there illegally. It's occupied country. So when they pretend like we only got 1,000 people here or 5,000 there, they always don't. They make sure not to include the contractors, the Blackwater types. I mean, 18,000, that's crazy. On top of the fact that 6,000 of them are just American citizens anyway. People there on the behest of the U.S. government illegally. Just remember that next time we talk about, a couple thousand people is all we have in Afghanistan. It says, with the deadline rapidly approaching and no formal decision from the White House, the future of the contracts, some of which have completion dates of 2023 and beyond, funny coordinated time there with in regard to like vaccine trials and interesting times. Anyway, remains unclear, but the Pentagon could potentially have to pay hundreds of millions in settlements or face years of litigation if the U.S. pulls out of the country on schedule or by the end of the year, as President Joe Biden suggested is likely, which, by the way, they can suggest whatever they want. I highly doubt that this is probably the manufacturing of the very excuse that will justify why they have to stay. In any case, the point is, if we're actually talking about that they are going to leave, but otherwise, if they do, they'll have to pay fines for contracts they set knowing past the date, doing it. I can't speak right now. Knowingly set these dates past the time when they knew they had to leave Afghanistan. Right? So pay the fines. Right? I mean, this is a no-brainer. I think the conversation is like that there's going to be a standoff between the Pentagon but at the end of the day, this is a no-brainer. You did this. You knowingly made the contracts, pay the millions of dollars of fines if you committed to leaving, but they won't. This is my point, and I'm always saying this. They won't leave unless they're forced to leave. I truly believe that. Quote, if they have $1 billion worth of contracts, they're going to have a barrel full of lawsuits on their hands unless they're willing to settle. Right? These are contractors that are going to sue the Pentagon if we stop the wars that we are currently conducting illegally. Does this not show you how broken everything is? I mean, these are parasites feeding off of the illegal war machine, and they're going to sue our government if we stop them. For crying out loud, guys, we are broken. In any sense, is it not, if we actually wanted to stop this, and we're talking about billions in contracts and they're willing to spend trillions every other month, it seems, for God knows what else while pretending to give us money for COVID, do you think they could maybe deal with a couple $1 billion in fees? Yes, they could, without blinking, but they won't. Mark my words. Biden suggested Thursday that the U.S. would not meet the May 1 withdrawal deadline. Shocker. But he said he can't picture the U.S. having troops in Afghanistan next year. Well, you know what? I'm not really shocked about the things that Biden can't picture, but that doesn't mean they're going to not happen or that they will happen. However you want to frame that in your mind. Any president saying, can't picture us not being there. That's the most ridiculously nonsensical, undefined statement. The only thing that has to happen is literally anything. A bomb, an attack, ISIS resurgence, they're going to go, well, now we have to stay. This is just stating now so you continue to think we're going to leave. Lies. Quote, we are not staying for long. Okay, how many times have we heard that? 20 plus years. We will leave. The question is when we will leave. We heard that 14 years ago. Right? This is pathetic that we've come full circle. We get Afghanistan papers where we find out that they know that they won't actually achieve it, just like with Vietnam. And we don't even have the type of thing we had with the Pentagon papers. Right? Like where things actually shifted. We know they know that they won't be able to do this. We know that we know they're there illegally. And here we are. Well, we'll leave at some point. We just don't know when. These are criminals committing crimes. We have the proof and nothing happens. That's how broken we are. Biden was asked specifically about U.S. troops in Afghanistan, but the Doha Agreement, signed on February 29th of last year, also calls for the removal of non-diplomatic civilian personnel, private security contractors, trainers, advisors, and supporting service personnel. Why? Because this is what the Taliban demanded, because they're not dumb, at least, and they know that those are the bulk of all their personnel. So when they write down leaving the militarily, that doesn't mean the 18,000 contractors. But that's the point. That's the real presence. It says, quote, the general trend regarding the number of DoD contractors in Afghanistan continues to scale downward, according to our own government that lies about everything. It remains too early to speculate on whether it will continue to do so on par with that of potential troop drawdowns, as no decisions have been made regarding future force levels in Afghanistan. Did he just say that? You're telling me they signed a massive international agreement with the Doha Agreement and state they'll be out completely by May 1st. And then he says, we haven't even decided if that's happening. I mean, good God, these people are ridiculous. I mean, I read through this earlier, but as I read it now, I'm just like, my God, this is exactly what happens with things like the deal of the century, or, I mean, any number of other things that they've done where they set commitments and then just they literally don't care about what they said they would do. It's just baffling. But this needs to speak to the entire nature, who these people are. It's crazy. On top of that, here's another interesting discussion. And this is coming from, this is actually an individual from Trump's administration, I believe, and also agreed with what he's saying is James Jeffrey, and this is the individual from Trump's administration. Now, this is saying Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who we've discussed in the past, former leader of Al Qaeda in Syria, argues his group now poses no threat to the West and even has some common interest with the U.S. Where have we heard this before? We've written multiple articles in the last American Vagabond about the impending agreement, just like with the Taliban, just like with, look at throughout history. All of these bad guys are either previously worked with the U.S. government or end up working with them later. What does that show you? Why can't we recognize that? But this is now being stated. Former U.S. envoy James Jeffrey agreed, telling PBS that Jawlani is an asset to U.S. strategy. And that's before this, understand. This article is discussing this, and we'll show you next. But as Brad Hoff points out, friendly reminder of the 2012 DIA memo that predicted Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State would be used by the U.S. and West as a strategic asset. In light of U.S. long-time Syria policy, Czar James Jeffrey calling Al-Qaeda leader a Syrian asset this week, and he references the same article. So they knew this. The point is, you were lied to about it. The plan was always to use these people. The plan was always, just like from the Mujahideen to discussing from Afghanistan, fighting the Soviet Union, to create, as Clinton and plenty of others have admitted, to creating that entity and using them against the Soviets, which then later became Al-Qaeda, which then later became ISIS. And later offshoots become al-Nusra, which get rebranded as Kaiser al-Sham. All of them are the same, not exactly, but the same idea in the sense of how your government is selling them to they're terrorists. They're created for the purpose of using them as the justification. The whole time they know that they are actually arming, funding, and protecting these people. And here is an admission. Syrian militant and former Al-Qaeda leader seeks wider acceptance in first interview with U.S. journalist. This is from yesterday. This person is speaking with think about how dumb it is to pretend that Tulsi Gabbard speaking with the president of Syria, the elected president, democratically elected president, is somehow enabling a terrorist. And yet here is the media speaking with a literal terrorist. And that's okay for some reason. It's totally different, though. I mean, give me a reason why that's different. I mean, one is a leader. You could argue if you want that he's a bad guy. So he's a democratically elected leader. On this side, we have somebody who is an actual designated terrorist who's just trying to be better, apparently, and saying, well, we actually have more in line than you think. Yeah, you know what? That's not too far off. But he's talking about your government, not you, because they do have more in line than we think is the point. But here's what he actually says. Back in December 2012, Jolani's group, known as Jabhat al-Nusra, Vanessa Beeley and I have talked about this numerous times, was designated a terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. Jolani, a Syrian national, was named a specially designated global terrorist in May 2013. The State Department cited the group's, quote, violent sectarian vision. Right. So again, this is the idea. The people, the Assads of the world aren't spreading their violent sectarian vision. They're even the Saddam Husseins of the world aren't. They, in fact, promote Christianity and other types of religion. It's the people that the U.S. government pushed in that were doing this, even though they pretended the opposite and brainwashed the people of the West to think that's what they were trying to spread to you. No, that was your government doing that. Always has been. And said Jolani's ultimate goal is the overthrow of the Syrian regime and the institution of Islamic Sharia law throughout the country. Right, so this is your government's agenda, it would seem, or at the very least, something that they created and lost control of. I don't believe that's what's happening in this case. Adding that suicide attacks carried out by his group killed innocent Syrian civilians. So here he is claiming, admitting, owning that he bombed and attacked not troops of Syria, innocent Syrian civilians. This is the guy that they're speaking with as if he's a reformed person that they're going to interview at the very least. 3 years later, Jolani sought to publicly distance his group from al-Qaeda that renamed it Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, a merger with other Syrian Islamist rebel factions in January 2017, formed the group known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Don't know why I've said that so many times. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as it exists today. Okay, so what they're telling you, this guy killed innocent Syrians, started this group, which led to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Okay, that is a terrorist organization. Now it says James Jeffrey, who served as a U.S. ambassador under both Republican and Democrat administrations, and most recently a special representative for Syria engagement and Syrian envoy to the global coalition to defeat ISIS during the Trump administration, or so we were told. Remember how they defeated them 100% more than once? That's why they're still fighting today, right? Told Smith that Jolani's organization was, quote, an asset to American strategy in Idlib. So this is Trump's envoy at the time stating on the record that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is an asset to American strategy. Okay, this is a huge slip in my opinion, or maybe they wanted us to know it for some reason. Quote, they are the least bad option of the various options on Idlib. And Idlib is one of the most important places in Syria, which is one of the most important places right now in the Middle East, which is, by the way, why Turkey is involved, which is why they're all aiming for this, is why they're desperately trying to maintain control of Idlib, right? That's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the group that currently occupies Idlib. So you can start to get the pieces together here. It's an asset to the U.S. government. As he's saying, Idlib is the most important. That's why they're the least bad option there. But remember, this is a group that they will likewise talk about as if they're the biggest terrorist organization in the area. The guy that killed Syrian people. Are you beginning to recognize that your government has been working with these people the entire time? Here is some discussions from the past that we've shared. Here's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham launching dozens of rockets at the Hamaim Air Base, which is a Russian air base. Remember, which was not, but they were blaming, the U.S. government was acting like they had nothing to do with this. We have no idea what's going on. Here's that group attacking Russian air bases in Syria, working at the behest of the U.S. Russian warns Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is preparing to stage chemical attacks in Syria's Idlib, which they did, which we've talked about. Syrian Arab Army discovers more U.S. supplied weapons in Syria. Guess where those were going to? They were going to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The U.S. government was obviously, and as we can now see, they're an asset, were being supplied weapons by the U.S. government. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham confirms its violations of demilitarized zone agreement. Remember the agreement between Idlib and they kept blaming Syria's army? The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group was the one violating the zone, creating the conflicts, and they even claimed it and said so. You think that was done at the behest of the U.S. government that didn't want Syria to take back Idlib? It's a pretty easy thing to answer. Hayat al-Sham obtained 100 UAVs from Turkey to use them in chemical attacks. Right? We've talked about this so many times. Al-Qaeda members in Idlib pretend to be democratic activists. That's what they're starting to do now, guys. This has been happening for years. They're slowly trying to change the image of these people. That's why they tried to change their name in hopes that we weren't smart enough to catch on, because they want to use them and they want to transition them like the Taliban into something that they can deal with, because they were already their assets, you understand. Here is something as of 2017, Al-Qaeda's latest rebranding, Hayat al-Sham. Right? This isn't even a secret, guys. Here is Homeland Security.us or hstoday.us. Russian national. Guys, this is as of February 21st, 2021. Now, think about how ridiculous this is now that we're talking about them as an asset from the U.S. government side. A federal grand jury returned a single, well, I'll read the title, Russian national in Sacramento charged with supporting Hayat al-Sham, a Russian national, right? As the U.S. government is going, there are assets. We're, working with them in Idlib. But a Russian national supporting the group that the U.S. government is supporting in Syria is somehow a crime, though. A federal grand jury returned a single court indictment on February 18th, 2021 against Murat Kurashev, 34 years old, of Sacramento, charging him with attempting to provide material support, so, exactly like the U.S. government is admitting to doing, to a designated foreign terrorist organization, Hayat al-Sham. According to court documents, he attempted to provide financial support to Hayat al-Sham, a designated foreign terrorist organization. This case was the product of an investigation by none other than the FBI and other law enforcement partners. He was arrested by FBI agents and currently in custody awaiting his first appearance. If convicted, he faces a maximum statutory penalty of 20 years in prison and $250,000 fine. Meanwhile, your government is openly working with this group. They are the least bad option. Okay, there are assets. I mean, it is comical if it wasn't so upsetting. That this is obvious, that they're playing the games, they're using them as they see fit to manipulate the narrative and manipulate real world actions while arming and funding and protecting these people, shuttling them back and forth from areas to use them in different locations. These are the people that are firing Katyusha rockets all over the place. These are the groups, in my opinion, that are carrying out all these agendas to keep the narrative going. That's why we never have evidence of any of these things. All we have is intelligence says, because the intelligence are doing. That's what's happening. Now, to bring this over to the $2 trillion infrastructure, I wanted to go through this before we jump into COVID-19. Because, and mind you, this is a USA Today article, so I doubt this is going to be all encompassing, but I wanted to give you the surface level mainstream presentation for a very clear reason here. Because this, to me, is really odd, because this bill appears to be in a lot of ways, things that we've been screaming, things that we all know that we've needed forever. And that's on purpose, because within it, I argue, is the building blocks for the beginning of the Great Reset. And this is the point. Just like they always do. Oh, you need water in Flint? Well, we're going to pass a bill for that. But quietly underneath it, we're going to pass a bunch of bills for us to do things you don't want. But you need the water there, so it's going to pass anyway. Right? That just pulled that off the top of my head. And there's not even probably a bill like that. My point is, we see that all over the place. We see things that we desperately need. And instead of just quickly passing what we desperately need, they use our desperate need to bunch in a bunch of riders on the bill for things that, funding for Israel's Iron Dome, or things that we don't want. I mean, I showed you this back in the bill for Yemen. They tried to pass a bill for Yemen, and within that bill, they had all sorts of things going to Israel and all over the place that had literally nothing to do with Yemen. They did it because they knew we needed that to pass. So think about that as we go through this. Joe, and I want you to understand, so it doesn't, just because this is passed by Joe Biden or the government in general, doesn't mean that everything within this is something that's bad or secret or wrong. But we have to remember that the overarching agenda is the point. Joe Biden wants to spend $2 trillion on infrastructure and jobs. These four charts show where the money would go. President Joe Biden on Wednesday introduced a sweeping $2 trillion infrastructure and jobs package. Right, that's after we've done a $4 billion, a $6 billion, a $2 billion, right? Or excuse me, trillion, a $4 trillion, $6 trillion, all these stimulus packages, right? So we've already spent $10+ trillion out of your pocket for things that didn't help you at all. But now we're going to spend $2 more trillion to maybe not help you again. Gotta love how this works. His far-reaching American jobs plan includes spending to repair aging roads and bridges. Obviously, we would need that. This is something we've been screaming about forever. jumpstart transit projects. Okay, here, transit projects is me thinking where this is going. I'll get into the details. Rebuild school buildings and hospitals. It would also, see, hospitals, again, even school buildings. Of course, how are they going to rebuild it? We know how it's going to be rebuilt. It's going to be rebuilt with the mindset of where they want to go. The Great Reset, Internet of Things, 5G technology. That's how this will be rebuilt. It's not even a secret. It gets into it in the document. It would also expand electric vehicles, replace all lead pipes, and overhaul the nation's water systems. Oh, here it is. The thing that we all know we desperately need for like the last 50 years or more. We have Flint, Michigan, but we also have, what was it, Mississippi we just talked about? But we also have, most of the country, as Derek Brose has written about. More than half this country is in desperate need. But their water is literally undrinkable with lead or all sorts of other things. So here's a question we should ask ourselves. Did they literally allow this country to fall into disrepair or, to a bad state to where we need things desperately so they could roll something like this out and we would go, yeah, we desperately need that. So we're going to ignore the Great Reset additions to what they're trying to do on top of all of that, right? Even the water systems, what do you think will happen? What happens if they put in sensors in the water system or ways to shut it off if they think you're infected, or who knows what else is going to happen? I mean, that's just from a COVID mindset. Thinking about the Great Reset, God knows what can happen, right? If you don't pay your, say the right things and you get your social credit score drops too low. This isn't something that we should shy away from. This is what is happening. But the point being that water systems are something that we desperately need. The plan and the centerpiece of Biden's economic agenda will next need to pass Congress. So it's not passed just yet. Whereas apparently Republicans are lining up against it. Somehow I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. I think all of this is a government plan, and they're giving you the illusion of resistance. Transportation infrastructure, $621 billion. Now, just as always, going through all this stuff, imagine what that would do for Americans right now. People that can't feed their families, people that are still struggling, don't have a job. But no, we're going to put it towards things. And this is a better argument than saying giving it to foreign countries. But still, I would argue it should first go to people that can barely feed themselves, as opposed to spending money to companies, which I'm sure will get kickbacks, companies that I'm sure are tied to people in Congress. The way this always works, where they're going to make $300 billion when they spend $600 billion by giving it to people from inside and kickbacks to themselves and people that they, companies they probably own stock in, and so on and so on. Giving it to the lowest bidder so they can build something half as good. Like, this is how our government works. But $621 billion for things that arguably we do need. It would spend $174 billion, about 28%, on electric vehicles. Now, this is interesting to me because how that's going to be defined is very important. Is that going to be in a way that stops people from being able to have things they currently want, or minimizing that possibility, or replacing gas stations with things that should, like this? That's important because you don't just get to choose to change everyone's lives, whether it's better for the planet or not. That's something that people have to decide for themselves. You can incentivize them, but you cannot coerce them. That's what's happening everywhere. They're acting like it's okay to coerce people because it's better for everyone. And this collectivist mentality is the problem. It's dangerous. And international law directly contrasts that. You do not get to put collective society or science above that of the individual. Simply the case. UNESCO has made that clear. But your governments don't care about what's right or what's legal. They just don't. But what's interesting is putting money toward the broadening out of this in general, about maybe adding more stations for electric cars that don't hinder other gas stations or so on. That's a good thing. But to do so, which I believe this is, about switching these things out when it's not your choice, well, that concerns me. But I don't know because I can't see it yet. It says that includes a network of 500,000 electric vehicle stations using electric vehicles in bus fleets. Like, that's a good thing. I don't see why anybody would care whether they're driving a bus that's electric or not. As long as it goes the same routes and does the same thing, I would say that's a good thing. And replacing the federal government's fleet of diesel transit vehicles, also good with electric vehicles. It would also offer tax incentives and rebates for electric cars. All those sound good unless that whole electric part of it is taking the place of something else as opposed to being added. About 100, and look, personal opinion, and look, just right off the bat, essentially, if this were to happen, I think I would stick with my gas car at the moment, just because I don't trust these. And in a lot of ways, I think some of these things are worse in the long run. But if it turned out that it was better in general and I could, financially make it happen, I don't have a problem with it. I think these things are potentially good or trying to be. But at the end of the day, this is, again, sort of a cover, in my opinion, for things that are a little more nefarious. About $150 billion would pay for fixing roads and bridges. Again, Why that has to happen with some like middle of pandemic, they say, massive infrastructure bill because we're all in danger and not just because we've been paying taxes our whole lives is beyond me. Shouldn't they already be doing that? You know why they don't? Because they're spending it on war. That's why. Your roads and bridges should have been fixed because you're already paying taxes. And you know what? Most of us like 50%. And it is disgusting. That's not how this should work. Before 1913, they didn't have taxes like that. So it's clear that it's possible and even possible to thrive without draining money from your people. But it's not about doing things for you, as you can clearly see. We pay taxes our whole lives, and then they have to do another bill to be able to fix the things they already promised they would fix. That's the problem with this government or government in general. Chosen by those in the most need of repair. So they choose, I'm sure, so which means it might not be what you want. That includes 20,000 miles of highways and roads and 10 most economically significant bridges, as well as small bridges. Modernizing transit systems. Again, this is when they're modernizing and changing things over that necessarily aren't broken. It concerns me because of how their mind is already set. It may not, I can almost promise you that the way this is going, when they modernize these things, will not have the interest of what most Americans want. It'll have the interest of what they think you should want. That concerns me. Going down, quality of life at home, $650 billion. Underground water infrastructure and broadband expansion. That is 5G. That's what this is. That's been happening. It already is happening. I had a video that was over 1 million views that discussed the fact that Trump passed a bill under the chaos of COVID about installing 5G infrastructure. No, and I've discussed the weird correlations between the two things, but in no way in that video was I arguing that one was causing the other. My point was simply to say, look, they're passing 5G legislation while you're not paying attention. Over 1 million views, the most I've ever had, deleted. Probably led to the channel being deleted as well, because they don't want you knowing that's happening. And why is that? Because the video was completely sourced. It was definitely happening. I showed you the bill. They just don't like me talking about the truth, apparently. What they tried to do is pretend like I was conflating the things, and I wasn't. Underground water infrastructure. Why is this stuff only being forced in now? Haven't we needed this for 50 years? Where is the tax dollars going? To war. That's the point. The plan would spend $213 billion to build, preserve, and retrofit more than 2 million affordable homes with commercial buildings. All those homes, no doubt, will be Internet of Things, complete top to bottom. An additional $111 billion would go toward clean drinking water. Good thing we have to pass bills on top of the taxes to get what we should already have, including replacement of all lead pipes. So they're still using lead pipes. You know how long we've known that's a problem and how long they tax us under the guise of water infrastructure? I just showed you Mississippi. This passed water legislation like every year since 2015, and every year getting billions of dollars from the EPA. And every year it's the same problem. They don't use it for what they tell you they do. And this again, will probably not do that. But my point in the beginning was to say, maybe they will this time. And maybe that's exactly the point, that they've intentionally allowed this to become decrepit so they can actually do the good things, but then use that to cover the very, in my opinion, nefarious Great Reset agenda that's happening alongside it. Because you know how hard it would be for us to justify being unhappy about water infrastructure and new roads and new bridges? I think that's exactly the point here. So when we point out the problems, they're going to go, what, you don't like new bridges? And maybe they'll actually happen this time. Doesn't mean we should think this is okay. The plan set inside $100 billion for constructing or modernizing public schools, again, in exactly the way that I'm concerned about, while another $100 billion will be used to build high-speed broadband networks throughout the country. So now we have specifically broadband expansion, and then another $100 billion for broadband networks throughout the country. This is 5G, Internet of Things. The goal would be for broadband to become universal for all Americans and to drive down the cost for the internet. Now, I doubt it's only going to be $100 billion. I think that is what's being stated, and the whole point of this is to be focused on what that change will be. The plan also calls for, let's say it says $40 billion for improving public housing. 20 of that probably goes toward the broadband 5G infrastructure, including with that. Like, that's just how my mind is seeing this. $40 billion for improving housing, $18 million for veteran affairs, hospitals and clinics, $12 billion for community college infrastructure, $16 million to plug oil and gas wells and reclaim abandoned mines. All of these things have been discussed for so long. It's just funny. It's sad that this is how it has to go. Well, they need to steal from you twice. Biden wants to pump $400 billion to improve access to quality, affordable home or community-based care for elderly people with disabilities. I don't trust anything they're even discussing with anybody with disabilities or elderly at this point, with how obviously they put them at risk with every single choice they've made so far. I don't trust it. I mean, these might as, I won't get off on that. I would expand a Medicare program. It says it would expand a Medicaid program to make more services available. Just something that people probably want. Research, development, manufacturing, about $300 billion in the plan would be invested in manufacturing, including support for domestic production of technologies and critical goods. There's another $300 billion right there. Around $50 billion would go towards semiconductor manufacturing and research, like CERN, that kind of stuff. Things that we aren't even informed about that are doing wildly like things that are like so far outside our understanding. Who knows? Remember when I talked about CERN in the past, where they've literally, this was like 4 years ago, and they said, look, right now we are reaching into other dimensions with the intention of pulling things back over this. And I tell that people laugh. That was a statement made by one of the leading scientists in regard to CERN. And he goes, we're not talking about tomorrow. We're talking about now. They're playing with dimensional transitions, and it's crazy. Who knows what's actually happening because of it? But that's, again, more money going towards this kind of experimental stuff. Well, arguably this is going to other things, but who knows? The plan would spend $180 billion on new research and development with an emphasis on clean energy, fewer emissions, and climate change research. Right? So you can see the direction this is all going for sure. How it would be paid for? Well, Biden wants to raise the corporate tax to 28% to pay for the plan. Biden also wants to increase the minimum tax on U.S. multinational corporations to 21%. Well, both of them say he wants to, which doesn't say he will do that. And interesting to see what actually happens. But again, the point is, those things seem like reason, like, yes, we shouldn't have to pay as individuals that are already struggling. So they're going to tax big corporations that already got a lot of benefits. I feel like this plan is set up as a Trojan horse to look like something that we might want so it can bring in the Great Reset infrastructure. That's my take on it. Right? I'm sure people didn't want to have to go through that, but I think that was very important. I think that shows us what is happening. And it's going to be hard to turn that down, guys. You know me, I'm government at all at this point. I would rather none of that happen and we just ultimately be left to our own devices. Right? I mean, if you want to end with something, end with a massive bill that actually gives money to Americans, and then just step away and no longer speak again. That would be, in my opinion, the best possible scenario. But so many people think we just can't exist without government. And I won't even go into that conversation because it's so far past people's understanding that are still stuck in the two-party paradigm. But to finish this off, recognize that this is, again, something I think a lot of these actions are being taken to say, look, we're doing good things, because this is a good thing. Biden administration reverses Trump's ICC sanctions. Who can be upset about that? Right? It's crazy that happened, that they sanctioned an international criminal court that was trying to investigate absolutely obvious crimes. Now, maybe this will come back to bite him in the butt when they swing around and go, Biden, your government's, charged with crimes in Afghanistan. Probably that would be related to the president at the time. I'm not sure how that would work. But at the end of the day, they are doing things I think that they think we want. I think it's all designed to cover what's coming. Call me a conspiracy theorist. A lot do. Going forward under the censorship discussion, because over all of this, they're going to continue to censor us left and right to keep the narrative, right? To keep the idea that we're doing great things for everybody and we're, changing the world and Trump's bad and we're good, and like the same narrative, they continue to push forward. This will intensify. And to start with the one of the parts from the title, or wait, did I put it in the title? I actually forget now. This, first of all, says YouTube deleted 2.5 million dislikes from Biden's White House video. Right? So first of all, how ridiculous is it that YouTube takes their initiative and doesn't this then show you that YouTube is doing that everywhere? If they want your video to look like it got less reach, they'll make sure it shows less reach. If they want it to look like they don't like your video, they'll make sure it gets more dislikes. In this sense, they want you to think Biden is more popular, so they remove the dislikes from Biden's video. Look, did that happen to Trump's video? No, it didn't. I mean, it's quite apparent in a very easy way that Trump is more popular than Biden. But that doesn't mean that any of these people should be supported. They're all problems. I think it all leads to where we are now, and I think that's the whole point. But both of them are deceivers. Both of them are part of the two-party illusion. But deleting information and cultivating the image is what this next part is all about. Feds plan to broadcast government propaganda to streaming platforms. Broadcast propaganda. This is not a joke. From the Activist Post, a great article actually from Mass Private Eye, someone I used to publish content from back in the day. That's actually where I took that image from this morning or today. Think about the implications of government. Like, let's say right this moment, you're watching my show and it goes beep and the government jumps in and says, COVID-19 is actually really dangerous and masks save your lives, right? Back out. Think about how crazy that would be. I mean, even just the idea of being able to cut live streams mid-show, which we've already seen them do, but insert their own propaganda. What if it was the screen got taken over by their propaganda image while I was speaking? I mean, however they want this to go, this is real. It says NextGov recently reported that the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, wants to have the ability to interrupt streaming platforms like YouTube, Hulu, Netflix, Spotify, and Pandora so they can broadcast government safety alerts. So even during Netflix, say you're watching something you know about a specific political topic, like they want this to seem as if it's just like it's milquetoast. It's just like, okay, it doesn't matter what you're doing. We're going to cut in with like, tornadoes coming or whatever they want you to think. That's how they're framing this. But this is per the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, which, by the way, nothing good ever comes from these things. The FCC is investigating redefining parts of the National Emergency Alert System. It's always based on emergencies, isn't it? Their declaration of emergencies allows them sweeping powers, and they use it in every possible way. And wireless emergency alert system, including developing alerting requirements for online streaming platforms. An Emergency 911 Act, and this is where it's obviously always coming from. Understand, this is an act that was based on an emergency under 9/11. And weird, it's still happening today. Remember that temporary discussion? Just like COVID-19. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? Temporary Patriot Act. It's the same thing that's happening right now because these two things are more interlinked than you probably realize. 9/11 was part one. We're in part two right now. The Emergency 9/11 Act has been transformed into a 2021 Privacy Destroying Act. Shocker. Who didn't see that coming? The feds want the public's opinion on what they think about allowing government agents access to what Americans are watching on streaming services. So there's the other part of it. Not only are they asking for the ability to punch in, but they're also asking for the ability to know what you're watching and when, which they already do, but this is more specific. The commission issued a notice of inquiry this month and will publish an official request for public comment Tuesday in the Federal Register to determine, quote, whether it would be technically feasible for streaming services to complete each step that EAS participants complete under the commission's rules to ensuring an end-to-end transmission of EAS alerts, including monitoring for relevant EAS alerts, receiving and processing those alerts, retransmitting those alerts, presenting those alerts in an accessible manner to relevant consumers, and testing, according to a notice of inquiry. Now, it says apparently the feds want to use something similar to the Third Generation Partnership Project, which will allow authorities to play synchronized media streams, like audio and video streams, in a continuous way while those streams are being transmitted to the client over a data network. While they're being transmitted. Title, what was that now? What's that, 42? XC11 in Roman numerals. Communication matters of the 2021 NDAA gives the feds immense leeway to broadcast government propaganda to all social media platforms. The new changes allows the president and the administrator of the FEMA to issue government safety alerts. FEMA, of course. It appears that government officials are worried that people are tuning out the mass media and watching less cable TV. Well, because they are, thereby missing out on much of the government's version of events, right? They have to know, you have to hear what they want you to hear. That's the point. So how do they reach these people? By designing a new emergency alert system that can interrupt streaming platforms, of course. Study. Not later than 180 days after the date of enactment of this act and after providing public notice and opportunity for comment, I'm sure they care what you think, the commission shall complete an inquiry to examine the feasibility of updating the emergency alert system to enable or improve alerts to consumers provided through the internet, including through streaming services. This is crazy that this is even on the table, but we see where this is going. They do not want us to be able to communicate. And if we do, they want to be able to stop it or insert what they want you to hear. Wild. Well, on the note of that kind of misinformation, especially thinking about the idea of people who are playing a role in order to deceive you, possibly, I don't know as a matter of fact, but I mentioned this in regard to Rand Paul's little skirmish with Fauci, remember? And I said, I was concerned that why he was doing that was in the interest of arguing that vaccines are working. In the sense of saying, well, clearly, if you get vaccinated and you don't, why do you have to wear a mask, right? So it's a backward way of incentivizing people to get vaccinated, right? And that's what I stated. And I said, so if they end up proving what he was saying, will he then just be like, this is where we are now? This is the recount citing CDC director saying our data from the CDC today suggests that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, which, by the way, is completely not true. They are overwhelmed with information showing that absolutely they're just ignoring it, just like they are the side effects of the vaccines. We are seeing just an endless string of people who are we just showed you. Actually, I think I might even have it up right here. I'll talk about it in a minute. Let me see. Where is it? Right here? No, that's not the one. I think I closed it, actually. Dang it, now that I'm thinking about it. But in any case, the point was that we just discussed yesterday hundreds of people in the UK, thousands in Israel, becoming infected after 2 shots and weeks after getting them. And remember, we have to consider the PCR false positive as well. But we're seeing lots and lots of it. I mean, that could necessarily explain it. But we're seeing a lot of this. So the idea that we can just state this is about getting people to want to get this. Remember that they're already saying likewise that they don't know whether this can stop transmission. While she's pretending that it stops you from having, it suggests. That's also the point, right? Suggests. Today suggests that. Gosh darn it. Can you not just be like, we don't know? Is that not possible? They won't say that. But here's the point. Paging Dr. Fauci, Rand Paul says, please end the mass theater now that CDC admits evidence the vaccinated do not carry the virus, and bring the PSYOP full circle, right? So now all these people that were, now I'll get the vaccine if it allows me to stop getting the mask. But that's not happening though. But that is what they're slowly beginning to say, is going, well, if you're around your family and you travel or whatever, you don't have to wear the mask here or manipulating the situation. But at the end of the day, it's all about getting you to trust the vaccine. It all comes back to that. So I just think this is interesting that it ended up going this way, because this is what I was concerned about. As he says, as it reads, Senator Rand Paul shared a video Wednesday announcing basically what I just read you. And it says, please end the mass theater now. I just basically read the same thing. In any case, what's interesting is he's showing this article as well, which ultimately ends up justifying that the vaccine is doing its job, which it's very clearly not. Very, very clearly. And I'm going to go over this again today. Here is just AstraZeneca. We'll start with this one. What I find very telling off the bat is when you search for this title, which is something that I saw in multiple headlines today. UK reports 7 blood clot deaths among recipients of AstraZeneca jab. I searched for 7 die from AstraZeneca vaccine complications. Look at what almost every single article says. Benefits outweigh risks. That's in the headline. Benefits outweigh risks. You think it's just 1 or 2? Benefits outweigh risks. Benefit outweigh risks. Every one of them. Benefits outweigh risks. Benefits. They say it first. USA News says benefit outweigh the risks for AstraZeneca despite 7 deaths. Every single one of them. Outweigh the risks, outweigh the risks, outweigh the risks. Do you think they're getting marching orders? Because that's what was stated. But you don't normally put that in the headline. The headline is 7 people die after AstraZeneca blood clot. That's the headline. But you see, they don't want that because that creates vaccine hesitancy. So their marching orders are to in the headline argue that the benefits outweigh the risk of this thing that we still don't understand fully. Right? So as I said before, if we don't fully know the risks, how can you know that the benefits outweigh the risks? How about this? If you don't even know the full benefits, how can you know they outweigh the risks? We don't know. They're still being tested, and we're still seeing the negative effects continue to compound. It's just pathetic how obvious this is. Here it is. This is from today, or technically, oh, that's right. I thought this was so strange. It's pretty. It's from today. This one is from 7 hours ago. Same article, same story. Am I the only one who think it's really strange that Financial Times does not have a date anywhere on their article? Like, I'm beginning to see a lot of these things on mainstream where they're continuing to just ignore these classic tenets of what you should be doing, right? I mean, you can actually look at the comments and see that, you got 4 hours ago, 5 hours ago, so it's new, but why wouldn't they put a date? I argue it's because they ultimately don't want you really holding them accountable. They don't want to know when you wrote it necessarily or when it was posted, right? Titles can change and they won't really know when it happened. Mainstream media are so unaccountable today, and they just say whatever the hell they're told to. And I think that speaks to a lot of it. Anyway, going forward, the British medicines regulator has disclosed that 7 people who had received the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine have died after registering the rare blood clotting events that have caused precautionary restrictions to be placed on the jab's use in several European countries. Understand, this is after it had been suspended by 30 plus, and then some of them went back to using it for no discernible reason, claiming they don't care about the safety of their people. And now more are suspending it again, but only for under 60, which is what Alex pointed out. This was the very vaccine that they said we shouldn't be giving to people over 60. And now that it's working and they go, whoa, maybe for people under 60, now it's dangerous because blood clots. This is just all over the map. The Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency told the Financial Times that it received 22 reports of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis and 8 reports of other thrombosis events that had been coupled with low platelets, leading to 7 deaths. The unusual combination of blood clots and low platelet levels has previously alarmed some groups of scientists in mainland Europe. All right, so you have scientists in Europe that are alarmed by this, and yet you've got countries using it and screaming that it's good to use anyway. The benefits outweigh the rest. Use it anyway. I don't understand how this even makes sense if you've got one country that's even suspending it. Crazy. Reports of similar incidents have caused France, Sweden, Finland, Canada, and most recently Germany to recommend that younger people now, who are much more likely to be affected by the condition, avoid the shot. All right. So now we've got this one specific thing we're finally sort of admitting, whilst not really admitting it, though. You'll see it's like it is, but it isn't. We don't know for sure. But we were afraid to give it to people over 60, but now we have this one thing that we are proving. So we're going to say, well, now younger people, because younger people are affected by platelet issues. Like, how about we just realize that we don't really know because we didn't test this properly, and that we have a lot of things, but they won't go there. They won't. They're hoping that we stop paying attention and that they sidestep all these issues and pretend like it's natural occurrences. And we're not going to do that. We will report the truth for you. Or not even, let's not even call it the truth. We'll report all the information for you to discern for yourself. How that's fake news is beyond me. The Netherlands is restricting the vaccine for those aged 60 or older, pending further guidance from European regulators. In Norway and Denmark, the vaccine is still suspended. The MHRA initially reported the new cases on Thursday as part of a weekly update on so-called post-vaccination yellow card events, though it did not discuss the fatalities. Of course, right? So they have their so-called post-vaccination, excuse me, post-vaccination yellow card event, where they failed to mention the fatalities, which they just admitted happened, because that is the extent to which they like to inform people. You know, not entirely. How in the world can you have a discussion about the yellow card events being adverse events and not mention the fatalities that we are admitting that they're admitting are connected? That is called being dishonest. You're intentionally being dishonest. The whole thing is like this from top to bottom. The fact that these countries are, it blows my mind that this can still be happening. We remain absolutely confident in the vaccine, it says. The benefits of COVID vaccine in preventing COVID infection, I like how they added that, and its complications, but continue to outweigh any risks. Right. So we don't know all the risks, right? Seeing as how this one just popped up and we're still sort of denying it, but we haven't, so a month ago, you could argue we didn't know this risk. So what else don't we know? But they won't admit that. They're going to continue to push this and argue that it is happening and it's good no matter what. This is dishonest. All of the reported cases involve people who have received only their first dose. Of the 30 cases of our statement, sadly, 7 died. So if only the first dose was causing this, imagine what the second doses are doing. Now, here's the BBC. Here's how they cover it. In classic propaganda BBC style, because they're one of the worst. In total, 30 people out of 18 million vaccinated by 24 March had these clots. It is still not clear if they are just a coincidence or a genuine side effect of the vaccine. Right. It's still not clear, though, even though Norway has proven that they've confirmed the connection, and Germany has admitted the connection, and the Wall Street Journal stated there's a connection, that they linked it and they proved it with the science. But they're still arguing that it's fake news, though. Thanks, BBC. Great job, because you don't care about facts. Still unclear whether it's a coincidence, even though 3 countries have proven that their connection. This is bad journalism, or really, it's just straight up propaganda. It's about screaming what they want you to think, irrespective of the facts. God, excuse me, I keep coughing. Something in my throat today. The Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency says the benefits continue to outweigh the risks. right? So they're continuing to drive this in. The World Health Organization and the EMA have echoed this conclusion. A spokesman for AstraZeneca even said, quote, patient safety remains the company's highest priority. So we're 5 sentences in. And we haven't even gotten to the data. Now, it's good and it works. And they say it's the best and it's going to continue to work. And the rest of it, this is straight up propaganda. If this was an actual report, it would just be stating the information. And then maybe quote what they have to say about it after the fact. But they spend the first 5 sentences trying to convince you this thing is good. Well, we don't know it's good, first of all. We don't know all the side effects. We don't know what it's really doing. Hasn't been tested properly, but they're going to continue to scream this at you because they know what their marching orders are. The data released by the MHRA on Friday showed 22 cases of what we just talked about. Yeah, 7 sentences in. Glad we finally got to the point. Dr. June Rain, the chief executive of MHRA, said the benefits in preventing COVID infection and its complications continue to outweigh the risks, and public should continue to get their vaccine when invited to do so. Right. So you should continue to get the thing that has the potential to cause a blood clot and kill you. That's what she's saying. Anyone think that makes sense? Remember, they're also coercing people into doing this. It's incredible. And this is going forward to where we are now. The UK reports 25 new cases. So we're talking about new cases, guys. 30 people, 7 died, 8 died, and we have 25 new cases of rare blood clots linked to AstraZeneca jab. This is clownishly ridiculous. Netherlands halted the AstraZeneca jab as Australia now admits likely blood clot links. So now we've got 4 countries admitting the obvious link, or at least likely, where 2 of them are proving it. But BBC will tell you we don't know because we're real journalists and we don't know. Well, Norway knows. I guess you forgot to call them. Germany knows. I guess you forgot to ask them. Good stuff. Well, let's talk about some other things. This is Johnson & Johnson, in fact, and this is all over the map, guys. There are so many things coming from all of these things that they are ignoring left and right. This one you will find especially interesting because of what they said. The doctors themselves. Goochland County man suffers, quote, rare severe reaction to COVID-19 vaccine. A Goochland County man suffered a severe reaction after getting his COVID-19 vaccine. And VCU doctors believe it was a direct result of the shot. I haven't seen that anywhere. That is interesting. This is them, their medical expert opinion, saying this was connected with the vaccine. Richard Terrell got the 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson vaccine earlier this month. He suffered a severe rash that spread all over his entire body and turned his skin red. The 74-year-old was admitted to the hospital and spent 5 days in the medical center. Here's what it looked like. That's from the vaccine, the doctor said. Now, they could be wrong, of course, right? It's ridiculous how we always have to consider that, whether it's what you want to hear or you don't. They could be wrong. They could be lying. They could be any number of things. It's funny how we just don't want to think about that in any context. But they're saying, their research, their expert opinion, that they think the shot caused this. It says he tells 8 News that he's still very weak and that it will take some time for him to fully recover, but he's thankful he got the shot. This speaks to the level of social engineering, propaganda, just brainwashing. Just wait. He almost died, by the way. And he would have died if they went, well, but he's still glad he got the thing, though. Like, that's incredible to me. But think about this as we go forward. Ask yourself this. So if we're sitting here talking about side effects, negative effects, and what they're telling you is, well, we don't know for sure. Like, you get a death, anaphylactic shock, blood clot that we don't know for sure. Haven't proven it definitively. But when we get, a rash on your arm or a headache or nausea, vomiting, malaise, all these things, do we do tests to confirm those things? Or do they just go, oh, well, that's a normal side effect of this, and we expected that? Okay, so is that not just correlation and then assumption? It is. It's exactly what it is. So recognize the hypocrisy of choosing to put off things that are more severe because we don't know for sure, but then just assuming, like, look, let's say your arm breaks out in a red rash. It's pretty obvious. You see the hole and you see where the vaccine did that, but do you know for sure? It's the same ridiculous mindset of saying that guy got a vaccine in perfect health and dies 30 seconds later, which has happened, drop dead. We've seen multiple cases of that. And then going, well, we don't know. Which, rightly so, we don't. And it could have been something else. But the point is, until you can do the research, and even when you do, and you find that there's nothing else that makes sense, you have to then talk about the vaccine. And they're not doing that. In regard to the rash on your arm, you won't know for sure. But at the end of the day, it makes the most sense because it's obvious that's right there. And so when someone passes out and drops dead or has a rash and falls into a coma, we have to go, well, it's probably this vaccine because there's nothing else that makes sense. Sort of like what Eric Christensen said from Utah, the chief medical examiner. He said, if we don't find anything else, it's most likely the vaccine or something like that, paraphrasing. At the very least, it's an indication it's the vaccine if there's no other discernible cause. No one else is doing that. They're just continuing to pretend that we don't know for sure because we haven't proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Right? But you can have the sniffles and a PCR test and get in a motorcycle accident a month later, and they'll go, well, it's probably COVID because we want to be safe, just in case. Just disgusting hypocrisy that errs on the side of the illusion. It says, it all just happened so fast, my skin peeled off. It's still coming off on my hands now. Remember, he's like, glad I got the shot, though. On March 6th, Terrell received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in Ashland. He shares that everything went perfectly fine. However, 4 days later, he started experiencing symptoms. I began to feel a little discomfort in my armpit, and then a few days later, I began to get itchy rash. And then after that, I began to swell and my skin turned red. He told 8 News that as days passed, things got worse. He had a consultation with a dermatologist and was told to go to the emergency room. That's crazy. Dermatologist telling you the emergency room, even that's, clearly it's very serious. On March 19th, Terrell was admitted. The rash quickly spread all over his whole body. The legs and hands were almost unrecognizable from swelling, and his skin was red and patchy. After conducting a biopsy over the weekend, it was determined that it was a drug reaction. Dr. Newton says it could have been life-threatening if untreated, right? So this guy's still happy he got it, though. He could have died if he didn't go to the hospital, but he's glad he got this experimental injection. That's just some crazy brainwashing. She said that through careful testing and process of elimination, you see, this is the point, as well as consultation with colleagues around the world, it's been determined that the rare reaction was sparked by the vaccine. Okay, here we are. How is that not the same process in regard to somebody dying? Careful testing, process of elimination, correlation we can see. It's a choice to play the game and be like, we don't know for sure, so we're never going to look. They don't know for sure here. Their expert medical opinion is that this is it because there's nothing else. But this isn't absolute, as they say in the article. So it's the same point. Why are we willing to accept some side effects with correlation and just expert statements, and then the other side completely adverse to any possible connection, despite there literally being nothing else that could cause it? That's a choice by people in powerful positions and people that are following their direction to just absolutely make sure that nothing even remotely serious gets directed back to the vaccine. Quote, we ruled out all the viral infections. We ruled out COVID-19 itself. We made sure that his kidneys and liver was okay, and finally became the conclusion that it was the vaccine that he received that was the cause. These sound like honest people that are unafraid of political pushback because they point to the vaccine. I guarantee you there are going to be people that attack them for saying that, which is crazy to think about. If you look at the risk for adverse reaction for the vaccine, it's really, really low, she says. This is what I think is funny. Even as she watches that this happen, she goes, I argue this statement was made so she doesn't get attacked. We haven't seen a great concern at all. I'm a big proponent of the vaccine. What does that have to do with anything? That is there to counterbalance the point that you're making about how dangerous that thing is that just happened. We haven't seen a great concern at all? You mean like him not almost dying? Is it a great concern? God darn it, this is some crazy brainwashing, guys. Terrell and Dr. Newton are encouraging people to get vaccinated and monitor their response. I argue this is probably the article itself taking liberty with what they said. My guess is they said we're encouraging people to monitor their response if they get vaccinated. And of course, they frame it as we're encouraging people to get vaccinated and monitor their response. Little different when you say, Dr. Newton goes on to say, this reaction is treatable and she's seen worse symptoms from COVID-19 over the past year. What? Yeah, she just said that. So she's like, yeah, that's not even, I've seen worse than that. She just stated that. She didn't say other problems. She said she's already seen worse symptoms. Now, of course, she's arguing it's of COVID-19, not the vaccine. And that's the point. It's about saying, get the vaccine anyway. Even though this guy almost died, we've been told the things we saw were COVID because PCR test. So go ahead and do it anyway. Staggering. Well, Alex Bernenson points out something I thought was very telling. Nothing to see here, Moderna edition, because Moderna was the same way. Like the Pfizer vaccine, or excuse me, Pfizer was the same way. Like the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine led to more pregnancy loss in rat studies. The only studies done. Vaccinated rats lost 16% of pregnancies, double those that got the placebo. Now, I found something a little more that I thought was quite interesting. Now, here's the document he's talking about. European Medicines Agency, Science Medicines Health. Now, again, this is the point that I always make, and I try not to make it all the time, but there's always new people coming in the show, right? The idea is, whether you like Alex Bernison or not, it's about the source material, right? And thank you, Alex, for doing an amazing job of continuing to cite the source material. So it's not just about sharing your tweets, it's about actually sharing what he thinks is the truth. I agree with that. And I do think this is the truth. And I think that's fantastic. He continue to do so. But again, regardless of what you think about him, because there's people that are just convinced he's some propaganda manipulator, even though he continues to share the factual information. If you can look at this document and shows you what I'm about to show you, and you dismiss it because you don't like Alex, then you're a dumb person. That's just a simple fact, because it's very clearly information that doesn't matter who stated it. Anyway, let's get into this. That was like the worst way I could have said that, because all it does is I just made the point the other day of not doing that. But, see, I need to take my own advice, about instead of insulting or being, it's try to lull them into a sense of agreement. I would even argue that's deceptive, because you're doing it. It is in a way. In any case, the point is trying to get people to see the truth. Anyway, let's jump into this. Now, here's the document you can see, as I always do, so you can see that it's a document, and the link will be in there for you to read for yourself. COVID-19 vaccine, Moderna. Here's the point. Under reproduction toxicity, it says, in this study, no vaccine dose was administered during the early organogenesis to address the direct embryotoxic effect of the components of the vaccine formulation. That doesn't sound good. However, such a risk is considered low in humans. Who's it considered by? Do we get to see that data? Nah, they just made up their mind that that's risk. That risk is low. How many risks that they thought was low in the past, like DDT or Teflon, that ended up being quite big? Or maybe that they knew it wasn't low, but they said it was anyway, right? Just recognize how I hate seeing stuff like that. However, that risk is considered low in humans. And it says, given the non-live organism nature of the mRNA 1273 Moderna's vaccine and the low risk of genotoxic effects of SM-102 containing lipid nanoparticles in humans. Now, here's the funny part. I argue that what they're saying there, given the non-live organism, because remember, all we keep hearing is, well, no, pregnant women are fine because the only thing they should be concerned about is the live organism vaccines. Okay, now how do those translate? Just because those are what are dangerous for women in vaccines, and because that's not present in the current experimental injection, does that then by default mean that it's not dangerous? That is a fallacy. That is an intentionally misrepresented fallacy. You can't argue that. But that's my opinion. I'm not saying I know as a matter of fact what they're saying is incorrect. What I'm saying is that statement, given the non-live organism nature of this, does not seem to represent the fact that it's low risk. It just seems to represent the fact that it's a non-live organism nature. That's different. But in any case, that's not the point. Notice they mentioned lipid nanoparticles in the same way. Here's the point. The overall pregnancy index was numerically lower in the mRNA 1273 vaccinated female rats, 84.1%. But remains within, this is what I think is even crazier, the test facility's historical control range. Low range being 75%. So I guess as long as you don't lose more than 25% reproductivity, you're all good, according to this administrator. If I'm reading that correctly, seems like I am. But that point taken aside, it's the point that Alex is making about the 84%. Right? This is your pregnancy index out of 100, right? So 84, this is what he's stating in his tweet here. Vaccinated rats lost 16% of pregnancies, double that of the placebo. That's, if they had that same statistics in regard to like creating antibodies, they'd be screaming all over the place. Double as many as the placebo, 100% increase, or blah, blah, blah. That's how they frame the data. Of course, they ignore this one and don't even talk about it. But here's something else I find even more interesting. You go down even further. See, this is page 50. Go down to the bottom. Past reproduction toxicity, and I found it very telling that they reproduce the same paragraph, but they add another sentence. Look at that. It's the same paragraph. It's containing lipid nanoparticles. It's the same. However, such a risk is considered low in humans. The same thing, but they add this. A significantly lower pregnancy index, 68%, was observed in the natural delivery group. Only and was ascribed to random distribution of pregnant and non-pregnant animals between the C-section and natural delivery cohorts. Okay, so you're telling me that this has a 68% pregnancy index if you have a natural delivery? So I mean, how is that not a huge thing to say? That's crazy. That what they're saying, and the point, as I think someone just mentioned in the chat, we've already seen stillbirths, miscarriages, all sorts of things being associated and reported with this vaccine. Now, I'm going to talk about the Vayer system again after this because it's important to understand why that is an important thing to state. But I mean, is it not very telling that they just decide to leave out that sentence when they, in the specific reproduction toxicity level of this study, and they include it way at the end before it gets, that's crazy to me. But 68%. If you have, it says if natural delivery group. So we have these people that are getting these vaccines, and this is in rat studies. But the whole point of doing these animal studies is exactly the point about bringing it full to. Remember, RFK Jr. pointed this out in one of his interviews, that the animal studies are one of the most important parts to finding out how these things affect the human body, specifically in regard to things like antibody-dependent enhancement, which I'll get into more in a second. I just find this to be quite alarming. I mean, look, I find it alarming to argue what Alex is saying. 84%, just in general, the female rats have a 16% decrease in reproduction. It's this, what you're staring at, guys, is the fact that these companies, both the pharma companies and the government involved with them, are choosing to ignore data that doesn't fit the narrative while hyping up things, even if they don't actually mean what they're saying, that do fit the narrative. That's called cherry picking. It's exactly what they were saying we were doing in the beginning while we were throwing at you all sorts of information for you to think for yourself. Who's actually doing the cherry picking here? Now, after seeing that, recognize that right now, April 2nd, in this article, study, which means it's already happening, by the way, so they're already testing on pregnant women, COVID-19 vaccine is safe, they say. Safe during pregnancy and may protect baby too. Okay. That's interesting. So it's safe, they say. Here's another one. Same thing. Pfizer, Moderna, COVID vaccines, safe. So let's be clear. They're claiming, based on the same study, the same one with 131 people, that's all it is, I'll show you in a second, that it's safe. Here's what the first one says. 131 participants, which, by the way, should make you stand up out of your chair. 131 people. You're telling me that this is safe for pregnant women after testing on 131 people? Are we really going to pretend like that extrapolates out to the entire country of all the pregnant women that are here? Obviously not. But these articles, Associated Press, or excuse me, NPR, is willing to stand up and say, this study says it's safe for pregnant women. And that's not even close to what this finds, even if that is exactly what these said. But here's what it says. 131 participants had been vaccinated with either Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, which I don't know how in the world you can do both at the same time. I don't mean in regard to vaccines. How can you study them combined? How can you take two separate vaccines, even though they're utilizing the same ridiculous technology, and test them as if they're the same thing? They're not. There's different ingredients, and they have different rates at time frames between taking the second shot. They're not the same thing. So to combine them and act like we can test them simultaneously just shows you the lax, completely off the rails nature of the science that's happening today around the vaccine agenda. It's like playing a game I forget that game now. Shoot, where you roll the dice and get the batches. I don't know. But it's like, you're taking dice and you're rolling it out and then just kind of arranging them the best way you can to make it make sense. Doesn't matter if it's the truth. They're gaining the information in every way they can. It says 84 were pregnant, 31 were lactating, 16 were non-pregnant. The study involved patients and researchers at this specific location. Now, here's where it goes on to say, the vaccines are safe and effective in pregnant and breastfeeding women, according to the new study. Okay, so this is what they're arguing. Here's what the study actually says. COVID-19 vaccine response in pregnant and lactating women. Okay, that doesn't seem to even discuss safety. Seems like they're only focusing on whether it has an antibody response. Well, if that's what you're assuming, you'd be correct, because it's not even about safety. Now, here's what it says. Neutralizing antibody titers were lower in umbilical cord compared to maternal sera, although this finding did not achieve statistical significance. I just wanted to point that out because what they're saying right there is the point. Well, it did do something, but it didn't have a statistically significant difference. So it means nothing. But they'll happily report it as something different because they want you to think that. But when something is not statistically significant, it doesn't matter. COVID-19, I mean, in a general sense, COVID-19 mRNA vaccines generated robust humoral immunity in pregnant and lactating women with immunogenicity and reactogenicity similar to that observed in non-pregnant women. Vaccine-induced immune responses were significantly greater than the response to natural infection. Immune transfer to neonates occurred via placenta and breast milk. Okay, are we missing the part where it says it's safe? You're not, because it's not there. You would think including in the conclusions would be something about the safety if NPR is literally claiming in the headline that it's safe, wouldn't you? When all they're citing is this one study, you would think that, wouldn't you? Well, I'll show you the one part in the article that even uses the word safe, and we'll see what that has to say. But recognize even what it's saying right here, that they're arguing that the vaccine is creating a longer response to the infection. That counters. I mean, first of all, the idea that they can even get natural immunity, isn't that something that they're pushing back against everywhere, despite the fact that the NIH claimed that on their website in January? Isn't that kind of backward? It is. But on top of that, the NIH said themselves in their own study that lasting immunity can be gained from natural, but only about a couple months from the vaccines. So this just seems to counter all of that. But in any sense, excuse me, back to the point, here is what the actual, here's the study, the PDF itself, not just the one page, right? Because this is what we're always talking about. Instead of just reading the paragraphs that they give you, like, which is what the mainstream media does, we actually go through it, the whole thing, and read it and understand it as best we can. Here's what it says. And I challenge you to go through and look for yourself. The point is the entire study is about antibodies. But here's the only part about safety. Following the emergency use authorization for COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, safety information has been tracked by the CDC using the vSafe smartphone application. Okay, so not only did the study not even look into safety, they're simply citing what the CDC said based on a smartphone application, which is basically the same as citing VAERS, right? So they're willing to cite smartphone statements made by people that they can't verify when it suits their narrative, but we aren't allowed to look at VAERS official sites systems where people are reporting it the same way that they can't verify. That's called a double standard. That's called hypocrisy. Let's continue. Consistent with our observations, the vSafe data indicate no significant differences in post-vaccination reactions in pregnant versus non-pregnant women. While the side effect profile of pregnant women receiving the COVID-19 vaccines was not significantly different from non-pregnant women, again, just general vaccines, not one or the other, but all of them, the relatively high incidence of fever, up to 32%, raises a theoretical concern for pregnant recipients, although the level of risk remains controversial. Do you realize what that says? This is them saying that first of all, an increase in fever when you're pregnant is a really big deal. 32% of these people had a high incidence of fever. High. That could risk your pregnancy, you understand. That might be what's happening, guys. But then it goes on to say that it raises a theoretical concern for these people who are pregnant, although the level of risk remains controversial. Meaning that we don't know. We don't know. Say it with us, NPR. We don't know. But no, they literally go safe. It's safe. It's safe, WebMD. It's safe for pregnant women, citing the one study that we just looked at. How is it that I am being censored for misinformation? How is this possible? Unless the world is completely broken. It's just, this is crazy. This is the study. I recommend you look into it for yourself to find out that not only do they not even look into it, but they're simply referring to the CDC's smartphone application that's finding reports about safety and claiming that's consistent with what we hear from them. So you know what? It's probably okay, but we don't even know. And 32% increase in high incidence of fever is very alarming for pregnant women. But WebMD says it's safe, though. Who cares? Makes me sick. Now, bringing this into the VAERS discussion, see where we are real quick, okay? I want to go through this again just briefly, because this was a really important point that I did not want to get missed. Now, this is Jean-Marc Benoit, if I'm saying that correctly, probably not, medical doctor, pointing this out. And I'm glad he did, because this is something that I found very, very interesting. Deaths in the VAERS adverse event reporting system set to start in 1990. Look what's off the charts, 2021. Not 2020, 2021, right? December 4, right about the time when all these vaccines were being used, these experimental injections. Well, when you look at the actual link, as I showed you the other day, you can see quite clearly. Here's 1968. They had 2 reported deaths. Reported. Okay, now it says events, but this is specifically deaths. Now here, I can just show, if you want to look at this for yourself. This is one of the ones that's reasonably easy to find. If you just simply go to year died and leave everything else blank, it'll give you the year died based, and this is the about deaths and adverse reports, right? So you can see that they go up. I pointed this out last time I made this clear. 1986 was when they passed the act that removed liability from vaccine companies. And you'll just note an interesting correlation with how it increased going forward from there. And you'll see a high increase, but it generally stays about 100 to 200 all the way until 2020. When between 2020 and 2021, it goes from 106 to 1,934. Think about that. So we have seen an exponential increase in reported deaths from vaccines, reported. But remember, the important part here is that, as Harvard stated in this document produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, you can see Harvard performing organization, okay? U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. They conducted this investigation about electronic support for VAERS. Here's what they found. Adverse events from drugs and vaccines are common, but underreported, which, by the way, literally contrasts what we're told every day by the mainstream media. That side effects from vaccines are very, 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 very rare, right? No, that's the literal opposite of what the HHS and Harvard found. But on top of that, it says, likewise, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. This was cited by RFK Jr., cited by Children's Health Defense, it was cited all over the place because it's a fact. Or at least it's a fact that that's what Harvard found in their investigation of this and general reporting of vaccine adverse events. So going back to this, recognize that if we can go from 106 reported deaths from vaccines and everything used before. So remember, let's just say take 2020 in general, right? This is all the deaths from reported deaths from any vaccine that was taken. Okay, so what we're seeing here is an incredible increase for the next year, including, again, in 2021, meaning all the vaccines, not just COVID-19 vaccines, but, someone taking it for malaria, taking a vaccine, the MMR vaccine, whatever. But what we have to remember is that all those were around in 2020 and being taken. And all we saw was 106. Year before that, we saw 78, right? So the only addition from 2020 to 2021 was all of the experimental vaccines or injections. And that is why we're looking at it 1,934. Now, taking into consideration the fact that this, whether it's 106 in 2020 or 1,934 in 2021, is, according to Harvard and HHS, generally about 1% of the total reports. So taking that simple math, if I'm doing it correctly, that's ultimately, you could argue based on their findings that represents more like 193,000 deaths that are not being reported, or not being found, or just being associated with something else. There's a whole portion of this country right now that are terrified to even to claim this is hurting them because they don't want to be seen as an anti-vaxxer. Like that woman we showed you in the school, the school administration meeting, who's like literally about to pass out with her mask on, screaming about how kids have to wear masks. She must know something funny is happening, but she's terrified to admit that she's about to pass out from the mask she's wearing because she's arguing for wearing masks. Like, this happens. So just recognize what this means. And the reality based on their findings is this is way, way more. Just like it's way, way more than it was in 2020. That's what this is. Right there. It's not hard to understand what that looks like and what that means. And as well, as I said the last time, we have Israel or multiple places around the world having a dramatic increase in all-cause mortality, right? As they try to pretend like cases and deaths from COVID are down because we are gaining whatever we want you to see, we're seeing a dramatic, alarming increase in all-cause mortality. As they put it, according to Israel's newspaper, Ynet, the director of the Israeli clinic explained that they are currently seeing a murky wave of heart attacks. The director believes this might be due to the persistent sexual situation, or maybe it's because of strokes and blood clots and whatever else. A murky wave of heart attacks. When you see a dramatic increase in all-cause mortality, it's because of something that's happening. You're doing this to yourselves. Oh, and remember the Euromomo website, as even Alex Bernison reported after we talked about this on the show? As of April 1st, the data just disappeared. What do you know about that? It's almost like Israel saw that we were catching on to a very alarming occurrence and they just removed the data, because that's what honest governments do when they're fighting for your health, is remove the data showing that there's a very alarming problem happening, right? Everybody agree with that? It's all about your health, right? Good God, good God. Couldn't be more alarming. Now it's moving forward to the next part of this, and I'm gonna see if I can get this through in 2 hours. Robin Munati, who, by the way, was just completely censored off of Twitter, which I didn't even realize until I went to show this today. He says, amazing. The wacko conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer nutters were correct even on this. The vaccines we have approved right now are just not going to be as effective as we think they are, says Danny Altman, an immunologist at Imperial College London. Shocker. Well, I went to click on it, and what do you know? His channel's gone. Suspended. As always, which it means deleted, because they indefinitely suspend so they don't have to actually commit to anything because they're cowards like all the rest of them. But here's what we followed it up by definition, children, this is what the discussion is, this article, the second generation COVID vaccines are coming. Okay, that's what he said, that we're correct on this. He says, by definition, children, if the second generation COVID vaccines are coming, it means the first generation were actually not very good at all, which is something I have been saying for many months and something that the data is representing that they don't want to admit. I wonder why he was suspended, right? Because he's not allowed to express his opinion based on these it's crazy what's happening today. Well, here's what the article says. Second generation COVID vaccines, right? This is the point. This is the future of the world that they are building. And this is all an excited article about how all these things are coming your way, about mRNA vaccines. Here's what it says. These vaccines alone will likely not be sufficient to end the pandemic, experts say. So why get them then? Right? They're right now undermining these in a way that they will argue, well, still get them because it helps you. I just saw that same doctor, I'll point out in a minute, are on CNN again arguing that, well, it's not about removing risk entirely, which is what entirely they've been talking about forever, but it's about just getting us back to a point where we have a little bit of risk, but not, right? It's just they're moving the goalpost back to the beginning. It's just embarrassing. These people must know we see how dumb they look. So these ones won't end the pandemic. So we're going to make new ones, and you'll take those too, right? So vaccine passports, you'll get this new one, but if they tell you it's not working and these new variants are coming around, they're going to say, well, here's the new one. You take this too. And we're pulling your vaccine passport, so you take the new one. You already committed. You've already invested in the vaccine passport system because you already started doing it. So now you're committed. Quote, I believe that this virus is going to change and that the vaccines we have approved right now are just not going to be as effective as we think they are, says the immunologist at the Imperial College London. Why? Because they know the agenda, which is this will never end. It's just like the flu. As Chris Whitty just said, we're going to just continue this like the flu every year, getting every 6 months, new vaccines, different hemispheres, and we'll go around and around and around forever. And God knows what all that genetic material is going to do to your body over that time period. Who knows? Because we don't know, because it hasn't fully been investigated. Now, here may be why they pretend to delete him, because he stated in this that the quote said, the vaccines we have approved are just not going to be as effective. What he ultimately said was, I believe this virus is going to change and that the vaccines we have approved right now won't be. And, it's just, that's ridiculous. The mainstream media makes way more and just straight up lies to you about damn near everything. In any case, it's unbelievable he was censored for pointing out this reality. Gregory Poland, a vaccinologist at the Mayo Clinic, says mRNA vaccines, such as Pfizer and Moderna's, touted by many as the future of vaccinology, have never previously been brought to market. Yeah, where have you heard that before? constantly telling people that. We don't know what we don't know. Did he just admit that? He just admitted that. We have no idea what surprises we might find in a virus that we've only been aware of for a year. Yeah, isn't this exactly what we've been saying? Yeah, but you see, when somebody like this says it in the context of vaccine good, it's okay. But when we say this in the same context, but argue that that's an alarming statement that means we don't know what the real risks might be, well, we're fake news and we get censored. He states this. A vaccinologist at the Mayo Clinic, he's saying we don't know what we don't know, which means there's no way we could possibly know what the risks fully are if we don't know what we don't know. But yet somehow the benefits outweigh the risks that we don't know. You follow? It says we have no idea what surprises we might find in a virus that we've only known for a year. Exactly. So we don't know. We don't know what the risks are. We don't know what the full side of it. And yet they continue to scream that we do when they want us to take the vaccine. And the history of vaccinology, it says, in which I've been involved for 4 decades, is amply littered with things we thought we knew. Yep, exactly what we were saying. People like this say a lot of things, but don't ultimately end up knowing much in the sense of this discussion, right? It's constant. Look at where we started with 3.6 death rate and millions of deaths and all this stuff. And they have been wrong every single step of the way. Which, by the way, is what I pointed to right here somewhere. Probably going to lose. There it is. Might as well just move this over here since I'm making the point now. As Alex also points out, they were sure about lockdowns. They were wrong. They were sure about closing schools. They were wrong. They were sure about masks. They were wrong. Now they're sure about vaccines. Vaccines using totally new biotechnology. They want to mandate them. What could go wrong? Exactly. Goes on and says, what happens if somebody's vaccinated but contracts COVID anyway? Get this. This is actually an argument in this article. Would they suffer an even worse case of illness, a phenomenon known as antibody-dependent enhancement? Yes, that's exactly what can happen because we know that's happening because it's been stated many times over. Here is the study that I've shown you many times from October where they discuss informed consent disclosure and state COVID-19 vaccine designed to elicit neutralizing antibodies may insensitize vaccine recipients to more severe disease than if they were not vaccinated. And even moreover, it says the specific and significant COVID-19 risk of antibody-dependent enhancement, or ADE, should have been and should be prominently and independently disclosed to research subjects currently in vaccine trials, as well as those being recruited or those for future patients after it's approved, in order to meet the medical ethics standards of patient comprehension for informed consent. This is why someone like the ethics chairman in Israel resigned, because they refused to abide by informed consent with experimenting on pregnant women. This is straight up stating they need to do this in October of 2020. The risk is clear. They need to inform people. Guess what they did? None of that. Is this the science? Is ignoring what this found trusting the science? Or is this ignoring the science because it takes you in a direction you don't like? This is the science. And there's no countering article. There's not something from the Lancet that says this isn't true. This straight up finds that this is clear. There's an obvious risk, a specific and significant risk, and yet nobody talks about this. They ignore it. There's no informed consent document that says you may get antibody-dependent enhancement. That's not there. But this is the science. They found it, and they're quite clear about it. This is them not following the science because they don't like what it says. It goes on. I mean, this is them citing it right here. It's very clear. The good news, however, is that second-generation vaccines are being developed by researchers, many of whom are working with novel techniques. We have an embarrassment of riches, they say. One thing that certainly hasn't been appreciated by most people is that on the back burner, the field of vaccinology has been steaming ahead over the past 15 years. Yeah, I know. That's what I've been trying to show people. Developing a range of incredibly snazzy strategies. Right? This is the 2000 discussion of saying we're going to alter evolution in 20 years with exactly this technology. That's the point. We know this has been happening, and that's why I'm alarmed about how they haven't been talking about it. It's been really quietly being produced in a way that they stated was going to change our whole world, but didn't tell us until it was on top of us. There are nearly 240 novel vaccine candidates in development, 240, waiting in the wings for their moment. Gee, I wonder who gets to pick what those moments are. And do they create something to drive that moment in? Here are a few that show the most potential. Why in the world are the 240 different vaccines and candidates being developed for, novel vaccines, new experimental vaccines? You understand? This is the new gold rush, guys. This is the biosecurity state, and it's all about these new experimental vaccines. 240 for what exactly? It says self-amplifying RNA. Guess who? Imperial College London. It's almost like they knew what was going to happen. It says, this is what I love, similar to the approved mRNA vaccines. Look, they just said emergency use authorization right up here in the article. That they've been given emergency use authorization, right? This is not by accident, guys. They know the truth. They state the truth. And then down here, they casually slip in the word approved because they're trying to deceive you. These people know that approved is not the same thing. They know that. Or if they don't, they're the worst people at their job, but they know it. And this is a point. They've been told to include this. This one inserts genetic material from the virus directly into human cells. Right. This is where it's all leading, guys. It's going to get to a point to where it's obviously genetic manipulation. And they're going to go, yeah, but now it's the future. Spurring the body to manufacture the famed spike protein that covers the surface of SARS-CoV-2. Like the mRNA vaccines, Imperial College London's design only delivers genetic material, not the actual virus. So it's unlikely to exacerbate illness if people are infected following vaccination. In fact, that's completely not true, because that's exactly the process we're talking about that leads to antibody-dependent enhancement. That's what they just described and argued that it's not the same. But we just showed you why. We're talking about exactly the things that the unsafe epitopes, the polyethylene glycol. None of those things have to do with the actual virus. So this is just a misrepresentation. Modified to turn the body's own cells into factories that continually churn out spike proteins on their own, meaning a booster shot will not be necessary. This has been coming, as I keep showing you.
Wall Street and biotechnology companies have been very excited about this idea. And what essentially it is trying to hack the cells in the body in order to make them into drug factories.
Into drug factories. They're making, but it's not genetic manipulation though. We're not testing or experimenting on your body or anything. Like, no, not at all. Crazy. But even more so, designed protein nanoparticle. University of Washington researchers have chosen to deliver proteins from SARS-CoV-2 as their weapon of choice. Not an accident. Your body is the battlefield. That's what this is. Created a vaccine delivered by spherical nanoparticles shaped like soccer balls. We aren't just taking existing proteins and tweaking them a little bit. We're making completely new ones to do exactly what we want. Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm not alarmed about that at all. But just a couple of the alarming new things coming your way that'll be randomly justified, just like these were, under the guise that we're all in danger and going to die, even though we're really not. There's your future for you. Informed consent, who cares about that? We'll just pass over it like nothing's happening. Well, vaccine passports are clearly coming your way, as we keep trying to show you, even though people keep pretending like it's not real. Hawaii unveils their COVID passport. Here we are. Back to New York, you've got Hawaii. It's happening all over this country, slowly but surely, and people are pretending like it's not happening. Pitched as the new golden ticket, right? Because you need to ask for permission to get your rights back. That's how freedom works, right? Well, as we pointed out the other day, here is the document from Ontario and Canada clearly outlining that they're giving their employers the right to just arbitrarily say, we think you might be sick. And then they have the right to not, they don't have to pay their employees. They can just go, you look sick, go home. We don't have to pay you. You know that's going to be abused. What if they just don't want to pay people there? What if they don't need people that day and they don't want to have to say, well, you look sick. On top of that, guess what the specific is I showed you is the employer's concern that employees who have not received the COVID vaccine. So all they have to say is, oh, you didn't get the vaccine? Well, we're worried you might get people sick. So go home. And guess what? Until they become vaccinated. So now suddenly this turns into you lose your job until you get the vaccine, but it's not the government doing it. It's the government allowing the employer to do it. That's always been the point. This is social coercion. It's also financial coercion because you can't pay for your job. Hopefully, if this does happen, what will ultimately happen is that people will refuse to work for such an authoritarian monster and they'll lose everything. And I'll cheer about that because there's somebody that is ultimately driving you into control. Bad people that are just too afraid to understand anything. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't even say who knows. They tend to seem that way, but understand that even people that are just absolutely terrified will be driven to this too. It's not always bad people, but it does certainly seem that way. But here's the one I was referencing in the title. Now, I feel like I might have pointed this out already, but let's look at it again anyway, because it's incredibly crazy. Assembly Bill A416 relates to the removal of cases, contacts, and carriers of communicable diseases who are potentially dangerous. Who decides? Well, your government. As it says, this is January 6th, 2021. Removal and detention of cases, contacts, and carriers who are or may be a danger to public health. All right. So that's subjective. They get to decide. And guess what? If you don't have your vaccine, well, that's an easy way to, you may be a risk. So you don't have a vaccine becomes you have to be now quarantined because you may be sick. The provisions of this section shall be utilized in the event that the governor declares a state of emergency of health or health emergency due to an epidemic of any communicable disease. You see where this is going? It ends up being, we think there's a disease, we declare a state of emergency, and it's COVID all over again. This has been designed this way. It's unaccountable. It's always in the guise of for your safety. And imagine if we get to a point where we have the medical pre-crime and we have these little situations on the side of the street where they tell us that they detect some kind of a virus. And they used to tell us, well, that says we're going to be sick in a week. So we're going to lock everybody down. Oh, and guess what? Because we did it, we didn't get sick. Was it ever going to happen? I guess we'll never know. It can be used to control you, to lock you down, to stop you from seeing things happening elsewhere. But in any case, it's about putting people in a lockdown situation or in a quarantine because the government decides they need to be, whether they prove it or not. It says, upon determining by clear and convincing evidence, and again, that's up to them to decide, that the health of others is or may be endangered by a case, contact, or carrier, or suspected case, you see? So what's the evidence of a suspected case? The sniffles? Oh, you don't have your vaccine. He's not wearing a mask. He must be sick. Contact or carrier of a contagious disease that, in the opinion of the governor alone, after consultation with the commissioner, may pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health resulting in severe morbidity or high morbidity. That's quite a reach after assumption of where they may be sick and then assume it could lead to a lot of death. Good God. The governor or his or her delegee, including but not limited to the commissioner or the heads of the departments, may order the removal and or detention of such a person or of a group of such persons, issuing a single order. So you can effectively detain an entire organization of people with a single order by the claim that the governor thinks they may be sick, or he says that to achieve that end. Identifying such persons either by name or by a reasonably specific description. Good God. So that guy in the blue shirt with the beard, get him, right? I mean, this is crazy. Of the individuals or group being detained. Such persons or group of persons shall be detained in a medical facility or other appropriate facility or premises designed by the governor or his or her delegee and complying with subdivision 5 of this section. So basically anywhere they want. Detention, the hospital, building, their apartment, whatever. A person or group removed. Oh, it's this one right here. A confirmed case or a carrier who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall not continue to be detained after the department determines such a person is no longer contagious. Cool. So they get to decide. When they decide you're good to go, then you get to be released. You don't get to be charged with a crime. You don't get to see your accusers. You don't get to see anything. There's no rights. Your rights and your constitutional rights are gone in this situation, even though that's not even possible. They're just choosing to ignore them. A suspected case or suspected carrier who is detained pursuant to this subdivision shall not continue to be detained after the department determines with the exercise of due diligence that such a person is not infected with or has not been exposed to a disease, or if infected with or exposed to a disease, no longer is or will become contagious. Do you realize how incredibly intentionally subjective this is? A person who is detained as a contact of a confirmed case or a carrier shall not continue to be detained after the department determines that the person is not infected. So you get detained if you're just around that guy. And until he's deemed to be safe, you're still stuck. Then it says a person who's detained pursuant to the subdivision of this section as a contact of a suspected case. Yeah, I feel like I have read this before, but in any case, this is crazy. So they can suspect you're somebody, your neighbor. And because they suspect he might be sick and they see you in the yard, well, now you might be sick. So now you have to come with us. And now until we prove the suspected case, who might be suspected because of another confirmed case, and it all triggers. So that guy's sick until he's proved he's not sick. The suspected case will be sick, and that you will be in contact with that suspected case will be also contained. And it's like this gets unbelievably ridiculous. But this is designed to be, we can detain whoever we want, whenever we want, for any reason, at any time. Because COVID. We have all been telling you that this was the way this was going to go. It's crazy. Well, in the interest of time, it goes on and on and on. For just basically boils down to you getting some kind of an expedited hearing if you want to be released before they say you can, and then they have to go to the hearing where they're deciding what you. It's crazy. At the end of the day, it still keeps you locked up until you go through the hearing. It's just crazy. But it trickles down, right? And it talks about the times. This is unbelievable, and this is direct. This is counter to what we believe we are in this country. Shouldn't be a shock, though, if you actually understand what your government's been doing this whole time. And remember that the very person we're talking about in New York is the very person who ordered to conceal the death that he caused by shoving elderly people into nursing homes. And the reason he covered it up was because he was negotiating his $4 million book deal. This guy's still not in prison because that's how your government works. This is the guy that gets to decide whether or not you might be sick because he thinks so. Good times. Well, here is Miles Elliott sharing this article. Can vaccinated people spread the virus? We don't know, scientists say. Okay, this article is, oh, you can't scroll this. I hate the censors, the weird. This was, I'm trying to look real quick to see if it comes up, if I can see the date on this before it closes on me. Yep, April 1st. I thought so. Okay, April 1st. So this just came out. And they're telling you, scientists say, we don't know if you can still spread the virus. But wait a minute, didn't the CDC lady just state that today we're suggesting, and this is March 30th, that the vaccine people don't carry the virus? Okay, isn't that confusing? Well, it's meant to be. We don't know anything. We'll state on one day what we think you want to hear because it achieves an agenda for us. On the next day, because we want you to get vaccines, we'll say no, this or yes, that. It's meaningless. You realize what it says right here? Researchers pushed back after the CDC director asserted that they could. That's intentional. So she says one thing, they say another, and we don't know for sure. Meanwhile, what they ignore is all of the real world evidence showing that they very clearly continue to spread this and very clearly don't have immunity. And it's ridiculous that they're hiding from all of that. But as he points out, New York Times, can vaccinated people spread the virus? We don't know. Doesn't make, and this is the point, doesn't this make vaccine passports an incredibly stupid idea? Yes. But they won't argue that. They'll continue to pretend like, well, it's working to a certain degree, or we'll get into this next lady here about how she's saying, well, they're going to be used to take these people will start taking their freedoms back if we don't use those freedoms to force them to take the vaccine. That's what she's arguing. But I think what they're trying to do ultimately is kind of drag this out so that they can try to conflate their actions with the fact that this is going away, I guess, or the illusion is dissipating. UK says 5 million get the second shot as COVID daily deaths fall. You see, they're going to do everything they can to try to associate their vaccine with the fact that this is slowly dissipating, even though all that's really happening is a changing of the narrative. But reality is that we saw these cases and information and stuff change long before the vaccine was even close to being administered. And yet we still told you they're going to continue. They're going to try to take credit for it. That's what's happening there. No vaccine passports was literally trending today. You can actually still see it right here. I doubt that it's still trending because I'm sure they quickly got rid of that, but let's take a peek. See if it's still there. Oh, it is still there. Look at that. In any case, it shows you here that it was trending. And the point is that people do not want this. So even people that support the vaccine do not support vaccine passports. And this is the idea, is that they're trying to, I forgot to mention that. I wanted to mention at the beginning. I had a great interview with Tom Luongo today on his show. It should be released soon. And I'm actually going to have him on my show as well. And we were getting into all of this, and it's interesting. I mean, it seems like they're trying to manipulate people in this very obvious way. There's a lot of manipulation happening here. And around the vaccine passport is a huge part of this. We think we were talking about it today. They just seem to force this in faster than there's something that's making them push this in faster than they should. And it's awakening people that they don't want awake. People that are their cornerstone, their bread and butter in lying and manipulating and driving forward the agenda. But here is an interesting point. I'm only going to play a couple minutes, I think only 1 minute of this. This is a woman in Israel speaking out against what's happening there about the vaccine passports. Take a listen.
Hello to you. This video, because I want to describe this. Hello to you. This video is in English because I want to describe you, the people of the world, what's been going on now in Israel. I want to describe you the life of a non-vaccinated people, a person in Israel today. So we are the people in Israel feel that one day we woke up to a nightmare. Our life has been destroyed. We woke up to a nightmare, which we have been kidnapped by our own government and which sold us to be guinea pigs to an experimental vaccine that they want us to, to donate, to give up our bodies and our souls with no questions. We have become the biggest clinical trial.
Which, by the way, is exactly what Pfizer themselves called Israel, the biggest lab in the world, because they're using Israel right now to test. They admit that. So the point is that I'm actually hearing this by and large by a lot of Israeli people that you understand how this worked, but Netanyahu didn't ask what they wanted. They didn't vote for this. They rolled out an authoritarian vaccine passport program because it's an authoritarian government that pretends to be a democracy for you guys in the United States or for all of us in the United States. That's the point. But regardless of what their politics are in general, these are Israeli people. I mean, look, it doesn't even matter. The point is some of these people will probably aggressively disagree with me on the Palestinian issue. This is the same point I'm making in the United States. We have people on all sides of political discussions now that are recognizing the alarming danger about what's happening right now, which shows you something crazy. That they're breaking their own paradigm to drive in what this is. And this is an end game, guys. This is real. So when we're seeing this is a person that's speaking out from the other side of the world going and saying the exact same thing we are and saying that this is crazy and it's happening right in front of us and they're stealing our lives from us.
Of a vaccine in history in a scale of entire souls with no questions. We have become the biggest clinical trial of a vaccine in history in a scale of entire country. Imagine that. Usually, when you volunteer to an experiment, you have the right to say no, to agree or not to agree. But here, nobody asked us. Nobody asked us. They let us feel that it's not right and it's not okay to do what you want to do as a person. And if you don't participate in this vaccine kind of, trial, so you are a criminal. You are actually a criminal in your own country. This is crazy. The Israeli government operates like a terrorist organizations and force people to join in this experimental vaccine whose future is unknown.
I'll leave it there. You guys can watch more of it. But what's interesting, thinking about the Palestinian discussion there, right? We know that what they've been people pointing out that they have pretended like we vaccinated 90% or whatever, and intentionally leaving out the Palestinians, right? But on other discussions, they'll act like they're part of. It's they play it how they see fit. These are people that are in an open air prison that are completely at the mercy of the Israeli government, and they ignore them in every possible way. Obviously, I argue it's a blessing in disguise that they don't want this thing, but recognize what they're doing when they do that. They've created the apartheid state with the vaccine too. And now none of these people have the vaccine, so they can't engage in any level of society, even the Israeli citizens that are Palestinians, right? I mean, that's incredible. Because that's what we saw. I already showed you the lawn chairs on the beach that say only vaccinated people. This is not new. This is the apartheid to the next level. And now even Israeli individuals that thought that they weren't part of that are now seeing that they are. Because guess what? Just like we talk about with left and right in this country. Not even that they're the same thing. I'm just using that analogy because it's in my head. But you're screaming about, oh, the Democrats, the Republicans. At the end of the day, the government comes for all of you. As we see Antifa and Proud Boys alike being arrested on January 6th, all this stuff, it's coming after all of us. That's the point. It always has been, guys. It's just time for us to wake up and see that. Now, here is this clip. I want to play this for you real quick, just so you can listen to it, and then we'll talk about it.
To them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. And the window to do that is really narrowing. I mean, you were mentioning, Chris, about how all these states are reopening. They're reopening at 100%. And
so the window is narrowing. Now, obviously, the window is not narrowing to get your life back, because what she just said is they're opening the states. So what she means there is the window is narrowing for us to use this situation to basically use the reopening and their rights as the stick, right? Basically, or as the carrot and the stick being the vaccine, basically saying that, well, we have to take this opportunity to coerce them into getting the vaccine by using their rights. Because if they reopen everything, we won't be able to do that. That's what she's saying.
Them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. And the window to do that is really narrowing. I mean, you were mentioning, Chris, about how all these states are reopening. They're reopening at 100%. And we have a very narrow window to tie reopening policy to vaccination status. Because otherwise, if everything is reopened, then what's the carrot going to be? How are we going to incentivize people to actually get the vaccine? So
she's point blank saying that. Right. So if we're reopening and life's going back to normal, what is the issue here? Even though that's not what's happening necessarily. She's saying the issue is that we can't abuse that situation anymore if you let them go back to freedom. Right. We need that ability to coerce them into taking this thing we want them to take. She may believe it's for our best interest, but that's irrelevant. Do you realize how coercive and manipulative that is? Even if you think it's the right thing, that means that she sees herself as the better. She's deciding for all us peons because we don't understand. That is staggering.
Then what's the carrot going to be? How are we going to incentivize people to actually get the vaccine? So that's why I think the CDC and the Biden administration needs to come out a lot bolder and say, if you're vaccinated, you can do all these things. Here are all these freedoms that you have. Because otherwise, people are going to go out and enjoy these freedoms anyway.
Right. Exactly. Otherwise, God forbid, they're going to actually go out and be free on their own. They're going to just go out and be free without us controlling that. We can't allow that. We have to grab that freedom and use it and hold it over their head and say, you can't get this until you take this thing, even though you're actually getting it over here. Just don't look over there, right? It's like, it's almost like they don't even recognize how dishonest it is. Like they have actually been convinced, like she's a product of her own manipulation. She's been convinced that what they're doing is so righteous and so good that lying about it is okay because we're doing it for good things, lying for their truth. We are seeing this everywhere. I mean, just by looking at, she seems to believe what she's saying. I mean, who knows for sure? But at the end of the day, coercing you, they're going to just take these freedoms without it. We can't let them just take their freedoms. Again, somebody who fundamentally doesn't understand what freedom is.
Clear to them that the
wrong button. If she's even saying it that way, right? It's crazy. Oh, and that's right. I'm glad I added this. This is just an end note on vaccines before we might just wrap it up there. Let me see. No. I have to finish with the mask because that was in the headline. But drive-through COVID vaccine. Do you realize how dumb and crazy and alarmingly dangerous this is? There are multiple locations. This is 2 days ago, 3 hours ago. Sterling Heights opens new Lakeside Mall drive-through. COVID-19 vaccine drive-through reopens after closing due to long wait, which, by the way, I don't even believe. The point is, do you realize how much? I mean, according to their own reports, people can have like vomiting and headaches and malaise and passing out and all sorts. We saw, look at what's her name, Dover, at the beginning. What are we talking to? We're letting people drive home after getting a vaccine that is verifiably causing people to pass out or causing them to get violently ill very quickly. That is the opposite of the interest of safety. That's at all costs the interest of the vaccine. It's like we talked about that person pulling over on the snowy highway and giving vaccines because they were going to go bad. Good thing you're giving them a vaccine that caused them to pass out as they're driving home in the snow. That seems safe. Like I said the other day, it's like going to the Waffle House or the bar where all these things are happening. Vaccines at the Walgreens. Is anybody there to help you if you have anaphylactic shock? No. But who cares? Because vaccine good no matter what, because we're crazy. These things used to be fundamentally obvious. Now, because people are afraid to admit realities because it counters some kind of political agenda, nothing makes sense anymore. It's only what narrative we hear and what we choose to believe. It's so uncomfortable, and we all feel it. If we just cared to admit to ourselves that this is dangerous, regardless of what you think that label should be, then we can all move forward and recognize that why would they allow you to put yourself in danger like this? They know that it's possible. According to their stated side effects, you can get violently ill. You could pass out. You could have shock. So, okay, why would they choose to allow you to have this risk? Because it's about getting you the easiest, most convenient opportunity to put this thing in your arm, because that is the point. If it was your safety, they wouldn't create a situation that increased your risk, would they? Painfully clear. Now, finishing off with masks, and then I'm going to leave it there. We were going to get into this horrifying story and some stuff at the end, but we'll talk about it more. To masked. I'm sure I'm already laughing in my head because I'm sure there are people that can't stand how my shows are long and are like, I wanted to hear about the mask. That was the first thing you listed in the title. Kind of makes you laugh, but I don't try to do it that way, guys. The point is about getting as much important information as possible. But let's finish off with this mask discussion. We just talked about this. More masks from China that have this or weird things in them. And yes, it's an obvious concern. But adding to this next is something that I think is very telling. And part of me thinks this is all about creating the context of, well, if you had bacterial pneumonia because of the mask, even though we're not admitting that, because despite it being very clearly obvious, 100% that these can cause, just normal cotton masks can absolutely lead to bacterial pneumonia, 100%. But the point is, when that begins to become clear down the line, they can point back and be like, well, it was all those masks from China or anywhere else. Basically boils down to, it wasn't our fault. We did what was best for you, and you chose to use those cheap masks. But that's not really the point when you find out that none of them are regulated other than specific medical equipment. And no, I'm not talking about medical masks from Walgreens. That is not even considered PPE. And you'll see why. As it says right there in the front. This is from the Daily Mail. What we are breathing through our mouth and nose is actually hazardous waste. That's a direct quote. Scientists find evidence of toxic chemicals in some face masks. Now, you'll see why I cited 85%. It says masks intended for use by the general public are not deemed to be PPE, personal protective equipment. Right? Things like with medical masks they wear in operating rooms or N95 masks, which is what they tend to be. These are medical equipment that are fitted, and they have classes about how to wear them and how to take them off. That's why these cheap cloth or polyester masks are not even regulated. It could be any piece of anything between two pieces of string, and it actually still being sold as a face mask. The fact that that's even there as a conversation should show you how wrong this all is. They have you wearing things that don't even abide by some standard and acting like everyone's safe if they have any number of these things on. That's just dumb. And we all know that. Therefore, it says they do not have to meet the standards of the mask worn by doctors. Right. That's the mask at the Walgreens. That's your bandana. That's anything you buy with the polyester, all these things other than the specifically medically worn PPE, N95s, and so on at the hospitals. Now it says 85% of all masks made worldwide come from China, and concerns have been raised over substandard manufacturing and opaque supply chains. Okay, before we even get into the article, can we recognize the fact that what they're saying is we don't regulate these things, so we have no idea whether the ones we're making here are any better. But concerns because bad guy China did the same. You realize this is a sidestep. How do we even know the ones we're making here are any better or worse? They don't, because they're not regulated. So how do we know that their manufacturing standards are substandard? They could be the exact same ones that we're doing here because they're not regulated. So how can you argue that their standards are substandard if we don't have our own standard? You know how stupid that is? But it's because China bad guy. And you know what? China is bad guy. They're all governments are dangerous. China government is bad guy. The point is all of them are out there doing their own thing without the interest of you in mind. So the point is 85% of them coming from China, yes, they very well could be just as dangerous as the other ones we're wearing here. And all of them have been shown to have these shedding of plastics and fibers that are dangerous for your body. I did a show on this. So let's get into what they're actually saying. Now, again, I want you to think about the fact that what they're ultimately doing here is just pointing to China. So when this comes back around, and by the way, it's just as much China because yes, they are also pushing masks and are also making them. So I'm not trying to say that it's one or the other more so. My point is in this moment, what we have is the US government pointing over there. So when this comes around, we don't think about who made us wear these things that caused us to get sick. We only think about where the product came from, and that becomes a partisan talking point. This is basic politics, guys, in the age of the manipulation we live in today. Now, it says scientists have found evidence that some face masks that are on sale and being used by members of the general public are laced with toxic chemicals. Preliminary tests have revealed traces of a variety of compounds, which are heavily restricted for both health and environmental reasons. We've talked about all of this. That's why I think it's so hilarious how it's like breaking news from the mainstream, something Ryan reported 7 months ago. It's like, and was deleted for. And here we are, breaking. Experts say. Well, I showed you studies that found this years ago, but let's pretend like this is breaking news. This includes formaldehyde, a chemical known to cause watery eyes, a burning sensation in the eyes, nose, throat, coughing, wheezing, and nausea. Experts are concerned that the presence of these chemicals, that's just one of them, by the way, in masks, which are being worn for prolonged periods of time, cause unintended health issues. So here you are again, where maybe it's not the fact that they forced you to wear something that's causing your increased risk of health, but that the fabrics that we didn't know were there. You see, so now we did what we thought was best, and we were wrong. So incompetence instead of criminality. That's an important thing to remember these days, right now. They would rather always be seen as incompetent than criminal, because you'd rather think, well, they just made a mistake instead of they chose to make us wear these masks because they knew it would increase the risk of illness they could use to point to as COVID-19 and continue the illusion. As I've shown you 1,000 times, the study from the British Medical Journal that directly finds the increased risk of infection from these masks. Masks have been mandated in much of the world as they are a highly effective way of preventing transmission of COVID particles, the article says. That's a completely 100% false statement. They've been mandated because governments want you to wear them for whatever reason they decide. And saying they're highly effective of preventing transmission is literally the opposite. Every 14 of all the random controlled trials we've talked about have found that there's no statistically significant reduction in transmission. None. No statistically significant reduction, which means it doesn't matter. And on top of that, we find verifiable health effects from wearing these things. And on top of that, we know that the size of the coronavirus, 0.125 to 0.3, or excuse me, 0.1 to 0.125 was the routinely cited number. I know there's a little variance there. But remember that we're talking about things that under 0.3 can't be stopped. The mask size, right? The old analogy from mosquitoes in a chain link fence. That's what we're talking about. We showed you another study that 97% of the time droplets get through. Droplets contain dead virus. Even a small speck can get through. The point is it's not stopping anything. And all the data's there, but here's a Daily Mail reciting the same lie because they know they're supposed to. But face coverings designed for use by general public are not regulated. Make sure you see what that says. Are not regulated and fail to meet the same standards. So how is it that we know that they're preventing transmission if we don't regulate them and they don't even meet standards for medical grade PPE? Can we reflect on that for a minute and realize how dumb that is? We don't even regulate it. So that piece of lettuce with strings is stopping them from getting sick? Apparently, according to the Daily Mail, right? That thing you just bought from the corner store that was made by the guy in the corner, that's apparently good enough because it's a mask and it stops transmission. According to them, it just says masks have been mandated and they are highly effective. All of them, apparently. Do you not see the agenda? Can you not plainly see how just intentionally dishonest that is? What we are breathing through our mouths and nose is actually hazardous waste. Professor Brognot said, quote, "We found formaldehyde and even aniline and noticed that unknown artificial fragrances were being applied to cover any unpleasant chemical smells from the mask." So we're spraying chemicals on this to make them smell better. And who cares because they're not regulated. So God knows what else is on these things. Isn't this unbelievable? I was trying to look that up. I forgot to look it up earlier. A colorless, oily liquid, aniline, present in coal tar. It is used in the manufacture of dyes, drugs, and plastics, and was the basis of the earliest synthetic dyes. Good times. It says, in the case of the blue-colored surgical mask, which we're all seeing, we found cobalt, which can be used as a blue dye. Cobalt is a chemical element of the atomic number 27, a hard silvery white magnetic metal. It's a byproduct from nickel and copper ores. Sure, that sounds really healthy for you, doesn't it? Quote, all in all, we have a chemical cocktail in front of our nose and our mouth that has never been tested for either toxicity or any long-term effects on health. Let me say that again. Professor saying this. All in all, we have a chemical cocktail in front of our nose and mouth that has never been tested for either toxicity or any long-term effects on health. But according to Daily Mail, we know they're highly effective against preventing transmission. All of them, even though they're not regulated, and we don't even know what's hurting you. This is the state of the absurdity of the world we're in right now. These are putting you at risk, and they're not even regulating them, and yet screaming they're going to save your life. Here's another discussion. Do your masks contain graphene or biomass graphene? I believe I'm saying that right. Graphene, maybe. Does your employer require you to wear surgical style masks they provide? Which, by the way, aren't surgical masks. They're bought at the Walgreens, not PPE. You might want to ask. Oh, yes. And this product approved for manufacturing in Ontario has late as March 2nd, 2021, has now been recalled. March 2nd, 2021 was when they've been manufactured, and they're already being recalled a month later. Here's a document. Face masks that contain graphene, which is a fullerene consisting of bonded carbon atoms in sheet form on one atom thick. That doesn't give you, let's do this. Graphene. See if there's any stated health issues. I didn't look at this earlier. Health risks. Here we go. Let's see. The toxicity of graphene has been extensively debated in the literature. The most comprehensive review exclusively summarized in vitro, in vivo, in your body or out, antimicrobial environment. Results show the toxicity of graphene is dependent on several factors such as shape, size, purity, post-production, processing. God, that's a sidestep, isn't it? Then give me some of the side effects. You know, what it tells me, the way that this is completely sidestepping the question is that it probably is dangerous. And Wikipedia is doing what it does best and hiding that. Oh, shocker. Check this out. I hadn't seen this before. Research at Stony Brook University showed that graphene nanoribbons, nanoplatelets, and graphene nano onions are non-toxic at concentrations up to 50. What does that stand for again? I'm forgetting the term. These nanoparticles do not alter the differentiation of human bone marrow stem cells toward nanoparticles. Good times. Who would have thought, right? It's not like they're finding ways to get this in your body in every possible way. Face masks that contain graphene may pose health risks, according to Government of Canada. This came out on my birthday. What do you know? Being vindicated about mask risks on my birthday. That sounds great to me. Face mask. There's so many possible risks here, and it's come out everywhere. Do you realize how many times I've been censored for talking about the risks of masks, including, the risks that are being applied to the world? Oh, guess what? Breaking news. Waste from life-saving protective equipment is killing birds and fish and other wildlife across the globe, a study has found. Thanks, CNN. Well, let me go to mine first, because that person said something really dumb. You can see it right now. But as I said, in regard to their tweet, shocker, it's almost like I remember someone warning about this 6 months ago. Oh, that's right. They were censored for medical misinformation. Great journalism, CNN. I guess you just forgot to cite The Last American Vagabond and all the others screaming about this months back while you were gaslighting us for thinking masks might be hurting the planet. Right? As this person said, just cut the strings on your disposable masks before tossing them. Make sure you wash your hands after. Right? It's a biohazard. We're going to throw them on the ground and put them in the trash and not worry about where they go. How ignorant must people be, right? So we're going to start cutting your mask strings like you do soda can connectors. I mean, and that's going to stop the problem. You realize how incredibly ignorant this is? We are drowning in masks and gloves. July 2020, there were human rights or environmental organizations out there screaming about this, saying this is a catastrophic problem in July 2020, and no one cared. No one even talked about it in the mainstream media. Here we are, April 2021, and CNN is only just barely beginning to go, look, it's hurting animals. The news organization that screams about climate change and how we're killing the planet clearly don't care that much if this is the first time they're talking about it. Here's another alarming point. Students at Florida high school warn they will be re-educated if caught not wearing a mask. Students at Clearwater High School in Florida have been warned they'll be re-educated on the importance of wearing a mask if they are seen on school premises. Why not? So you can choose not to do it, even if they're not forcing kids to do it, right? In Florida, different places. But because the schools decided they want to, they're going to re-educate you every single time you don't wear a mask, which will force them to wear a mask to stop getting told the same thing over and over. And hurting your children, by the way. They're continuing to put your children at risk. They're continuing to hurt them by making them breathe things in like graphene or what was the other ones? Formaldehyde or alanine or whatever those are called, or all these different chemicals, or the microplastics or microfibers, or just your own breath that builds up and creates moisture, which causes an infection and increases your risk of illness, which we continually told you about, right? But you can just tell this guy out in the front with his monitor, he cares about all the kids, right? They're making these kids get sick, whether they know it or not. It says the wearing of a face covering is a public health issue the schools decided for itself, even though the government's decided that's not the case anymore. You see how that's working? That's why they're forced. This is propaganda. This is social engineering. That's why they want the individual employers to be the ones telling them they have to go home and not the government. They're pushing it out to you to make you enforce for them. Because like I said the other day, if you stop doing this, people, this will go away because they're not, right now, it's only us that are keeping the illusion going. Students who do not wear a mask when it is required, even though it's not, should first be re-educated on the importance of wearing a mask. That's what they said. If after re-education occurs, they still do not comply, the student's administrator should be contacted. So why don't you just tell them they have to wear one? This is the same thing like Patreon was doing. Like, teaching me something, right? Like we want you to delete it, Ryan. We're not going to tell you what to delete because we're trying to teach you a lesson. Get over yourself, guy. Get over yourself, Patreon. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. You're going to tell us, you're going to teach us a lesson when you guys are clearly the ones that are lost. You realize how insulting this is? Just tell them. If they have to do it, tell them they have to. That's what they're trying to avoid, because when they say that, that becomes a legal issue. So they're going to coerce them, manipulate them psychologically. These people should lose their jobs. It's incredible. And as Hart Group points out, a highly visible reminder that danger is supposedly all around us, face coverings are fueling widespread irrational fear at a time when current viral threat is very low. That's a fact based on the CDC data. But wearing the masks is keeping people thinking we're all in danger. And here is an unbelievable story that this is the reality. And this is the New York, even the New York Post seemingly okay with this guy, attacking this guy for speaking his mind. Let me show you, play the video first.
Isolate yourselves. Wear your masks. Social distance. Just trust the narrative. You've never been lied to about anything. The government loves you. You're all doing a great job complying with the narrative. There's definitely not a psychological operation happening when you're convinced of a reality that's based on fear that has nothing to do with what's actually.
Look, okay, so just right off the bat, this is actually what happened. I've looked into this. So the bottom line is they're trying to frame people like us as being the crazy ones. Now, sure, are there people that are irrationally acting out because in our quote our side? Yes, I'm sure there are. But by and large, what we see is people like this, where this guy, yeah, maybe you think what he's saying is dangerous. Maybe you think he's putting people's lives at risk. You're completely wrong, by the way, but he has a right to say whatever he wants. He has free speech, remember? So when he's in his car, all he's doing is speaking out his window. This guy feels that he has the right to commit violent acts on him because that's what the media has allowed him to think. Not necessarily by stating that, but by continually fear-mongering and just bleeding at them that these people like this are the most dangerous thing alive. And if you let this continue, they're putting your grandma at risk, right? So this guy flips out, runs in a car from someone he doesn't even know, and begins to try to bash his car window in with the bike. As you can see right here, what a mask kicking, right? I mean, they're making jokes. This guy is a criminal. And by the way, spoiler alert, he does get arrested, apparently, at the very least looked into. But here's how it goes.
Hey, get out of here. You're insane, bro. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here. You're insane, bro. You're insane.
This guy reminds me of a friend of mine. It's funny.
This guy can't. Dude, get here, man. I'm going to kick your head. We're trying to wake people up because you've been psyoped. We love you, people. But you've been psychologically, you're literally been psyched. Wow. Okay, are you happy now? Are you happy? Trying to wake you people up over here. You've been psyoped, brother. You've been psyoped. That's what a psychological operation is.
Right. Oh, and good point. I'm glad somebody just said that, by the way. Right. This isn't a misrepresentation even by the New York Post. This was, it's, by all intents and purposes, doesn't even appear to be about masks. This is about the entire illusion. And all they can do is reduce it down to an anti-masker because that's the dumb thing they do in the mainstream media. Even the New York Post, right? This is about this guy trying to say you're all being deceived on a grand level. Not just the mask, but that's part of it, right? But they just boil it down to a mask issue because that's the best thing they can do. But as the person pointed out in the comment section, where's that guy's mask? Right? Again, it's not really about the mask in this situation. The guy was upset because he was calling the whole thing a psyop. That's what it seemed like to me. But as it says, the Canadians driver's anti-mask tirade, you see, it's clearly, I actually want to get in contact with this guy if I could somehow. Somebody want to find out and reach out to him and let me know. I'd love to talk to him. Complete with megaphone, was unceremoniously cut short after an angry bystander shattered his window. Quote, when people start smashing your car windows for saying a few words, right? And he's right. Who's the crazy one here? A passenger in one of the vehicles was talking into a bullhorn and pointing out the window. Witnesses to the incident detained the cyclist. Good for them. Until Vancouver police arrived and took custody of him. Okay. He says on March 30th, more than 22,000 people have died of COVID-19, they say. Right. So, okay. You see, that is when you begin. This is their agenda. If the New York Post was interested in writing about the story, why does that matter? It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about the fact this guy is exercising his rights and the other guy attacked him for it. When they're doing this, they're quietly taking the side of the person, mask kicking, and the guy, they're basically saying, yeah, that guy was doing something wrong. He's lying about COVID. It's crazy. Not satisfied, the tenacious assailant picks up the bike and begins smashing the mask holes. That's what they call them, the mask holes window, eventually causing it to shatter. Right? So this guy's a bad person because he's not wearing a mask, even though the guy that did it isn't wearing a mask. Good job, New York Post. Like, you're killing it on this one. This is what you get for trying to wake people up, was what the guy said with the bullhorn. According to the police report, get this, the cyclist is being recommended for charges of mischief and assault. Recommended? How about it's on record and it's obvious this guy broke the law, but we're only thinking about it? How much you want to bet nothing happens to that guy? Just unbelievable, because this guy's a mask hole. We have been warped. Our psyche has been broken by the aggressive propaganda, but we're fighting back is the point, and they don't like it. And to finish off the point, remember that we're talking about the idea of 22,000 cases, right? 22,000 people have died in COVID in Canada, they say. Okay, well, that's of course ignoring the fact that we're combining flu and pneumonia with COVID. Or influenza and pneumonia, that's PIC, they state it themselves, or the fact that PCR tests have a huge false positive rate, even 30% according to the CDC themselves in multiple studies. Dr. Scoglio, PhD, has in his studies have shown 95% if it's between 40 and 45 cycle threshold, which seems to be what most of them use. So is it 22,000 people, New York Post, or is that just what we're stating, right? Thinking about this in regard to that specific point. Flu cases in Canada, well, they've been exceptionally low so far. This was in November. So is that where those numbers are going? Is it possible that flu just disappeared? Or is it they were going somewhere else and that's why we're seeing this number? Well, at this point in November 2020, the last year's flu season, Canada already recorded 711 positive cases. Well, in 2020, 17. Yeah, because that makes sense though, right? It says 2019 Providence reported 147 lab cases of the flu. This year, 4. This is in specific locations, understand. It says this comes despite testing more than twice as many people for the flu. Right? So they're going out of their way to test twice as many and they're not even getting even close. 4 cases. Almost 10,000 tests were done in the first week of November compared to a 6-year average of about 4,500. They more than doubled what they did, and they're only seeing basically seeing none. It's insulting to our intelligence. Flu season numbers for 2020 to 2021. It says, of course, again, the point here is to establish And what you'll find quickly is that when they state flu numbers, you'll find down here that they don't have any flu numbers this year. I wonder why that is. But it says PIC mortality. This is not a secret, guys. The PIC mortality rate is the rate of deaths attributed to pneumonia, influenza, or COVID-19. That's the only number we're using. When they cite COVID-19 death mortality numbers, they're citing the PIC number. That's not hard to find out. But here's what they also say. In a non-COVID year, this would be called P&I, pneumonia and influenza. And that's how they inflated the influenza numbers with pneumonia. They're lying to you. This week's PIC rate is 12.1. Uh-oh. Oh, dang it. Hold on. Just in case I had something else highlighted, I didn't want to lose it. I do that all the time. So it's saying 12.1%, which is above the epidemic threshold. So currently we're in epidemic, even though that's combining two other complete. It's just, how do we not see how they're gaming this? You're taking flu and pneumonia, entirely separate things that have entirely big numbers of deaths and sickness from long before this, and just jamming them into COVID-19 and pretending like that doesn't obviously inflate the numbers. Yes, they're talking about secondary. I've talked about this before, but when you have nothing showing up for flu, it's not secondary. It's all the flu. They're jamming in flu as COVID-19. And it says hospitalization rates. And I think I just went past that and went to the next one. But I want to point this out. There has been one pediatric death, one, during this season for the flu. One. Which means the kids that are actually dying from the flu are the kids that are claiming died from COVID-19. Because there have been some kids that have died, and despite having a 0% chance, according to the CDC, it's probably because they're dying from pneumonia and the flu, and they're being lumped in. And that's why we're only claiming there's only one when there's usually way, way more than that. Final numbers from 2019, 2020. Here's where it says right here. Between October 1st, 2019 and April 4, 2020, 39 to 56 million. 410,000 to 740,000 hospitalizations. These are all flu, mind you. 24,000 to 62,000 deaths. 62,000 deaths in high years. And we're talking about 10. One kid. They think we're that stupid. I hope we see that. They really don't think we're smart enough to see past this. As I've shown you before, here's 2021. Basically nothing. It doesn't exist, guys. They have moved these numbers to a new category. This is just flu, weekly influenza. Let's take a look at 2019 to 2020. Go back to the time we're in right now. Let's go back to right here. Look at that. And yet we're pretending like this is what it was the year before, but when we go to this year, it's just gone. Anybody want to pretend like that makes sense? I mean, it's never looked like this. It's nothing. It's basically non-existent. There's even some that were white in some cases, which means there's just not any data. Okay, scrolling down. Here is another example. Remember, this is on the CDC website, just so we're all clear about that. The Flu View CDC website, right? So the point is they listed as well, as I keep showing you. PIC, pneumonia, influenza, and COVID mortality together. And what you see here is yellow is influenza, blue, COVID-coded deaths, red, deaths due to PIC in total. Okay. Look at the huge red spike right here. Red being the combination of influenza, pneumonia, and COVID. So explain for me how there is zero yellow, right, which is the flu alone, zero. But yet the huge spike of the combination is more than it's ever been. This is the stupidestly obvious thing I've ever seen. They're moving flu and pneumonia into the COVID numbers. That's what's happening. They're moving it into the combination PIC percentage. That's why there's zero flu. Of course, their argument, and the stupid argument, is that our preventative measures are stopping flu, and I'm going to get into that next, but it's just illogical. Again, here are influenza by itself, but just pediatric deaths. Remember, we had one over there. Look at these numbers. Here it is this year. It's not that it's not happening. It's just being recategorized, which is very insulting. Well, here's MedPage today. COVID-19 wiped out, it says, wiped out the flu around the world this year. That's according to the CDC. That's literally what the CDC is saying. Hey, what do you know? COVID-19 wiped out the flu. And a lot of these really, really ignorant mainstream media repugnants just gobbled it up. Look what it says. Community mitigation measures halted the other pandemic here. Because it's a pandemic, apparently, and abroad. But winter is coming. Dark winter is coming. Dark winter. Guys, they were saying this back in September. In 2020 in September. Do you realize how telling that is? Like, let's go back to September really quick. Oh, I guess that goes back to the other one. Let's see. Oh, no, wait. No, it is. Okay. Oh, they just conveniently skipped November. Isn't that perfect? God, I swear, this is so dishonest. September? Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I'm being an idiot. I think I just I went back too far. Here we go. Okay, I did. Well, see, so look at this. How was that, right? You show the inconsistency with this. This is top of the line, like super, super serious. And there's not much else happening everywhere else. Crazy. And so here they are going, oh, it wiped it out. Even though they're telling you that there's numbers inflating the COVID numbers. Here's what it says. Flu numbers in the U.S. were historically low during COVID-19 in the spring, with deep declines also occurring in the recently completed Southern Hemisphere flu season. CDC researchers found. Researchers, right? So that's pretending like they actually researched something instead of just acknowledged what they claim is a correlation. Influenza positivity rates in specimens tested, a standard metric of community flu activity, fell 98% in 2020. 98%. A graph indicated that influenza positivity rates dropped off sharply, approaching zero. I mean, you can't even say this with a straight face. This is the dumbest argument, and this is all they could do. Because it was clear that at some point they recognized they were desperately in need of keeping the illusion going, so they just decided to just pull over flu. Well, hell, we do it with pneumonia, no one pays attention. So let's do it with pneumonia and flu, and just pull it into COVID. They just don't think very highly of our intelligence. Olson and colleagues noted that they used March 1st as a benchmark because it was closest to when the U.S. declared COVID-19 a public health emergency. Oh, so we'll just pick that. Well, that spot. Because it seems to go. No, that's obviously for a reason. And when, quote, widespread implementation, which is the point, of community measures such as school closures, school distancing, and mask wearing started around the country. You see, so they just chose to start there so they can correlate it with the beginning of those measures. The point being, those measures increased your illness, hurt people, increased suicides and risk of other illnesses and diabetes, heart attacks, and everything else. And they're claiming that those things increased your health so much that flu just disappeared. It says because influenza is less transmissible, these measures, quote, likely contributed. Don't you like that? Likely. So the answer is we don't know, but we're willing to assume it, though, contributed to a more substantial interruption in influenza transmission. Or they just moved it somewhere else. Because all these things we're talking about, and also the question you should ask, an obvious question on your mind should be, okay, if all these things were that easy to stop the flu, and we've known all these measures for all this time and used them hundreds of years ago, why haven't we been doing this every year for the flu? And therein lies the question. One is because they don't actually do what they're saying they do. But on top of that, even if they did, they wouldn't do it because they're desperately in need of the flu season because that's their profit motive. And continue to test new things on you all the time. But at the end of the day, they spread very similarly. And the mask won't stop either one. So the point is that this is a lie. Because they're using those numbers. Quote, although causality cannot be inferred from these ecological comparisons, the consistent trends over time and place are compelling and biologically plausible. Please tell me somebody else is catching the other point. Okay, so if we're willing to assume that because we can't, the causality can't be inferred, right? Causation is not, correlation is not causation, right? So we're going to assume this. We're going to assume that flu was taken away by all these actions because why? Because that's the narrative we've been spinning. So we're going to assume because they align. Okay, but we won't do that in regard to side effects of vaccines. We won't do that in erring on the side of safety, that because this person got a vaccine and died 2 seconds later, that we won't do that. But we'll do it over here because it works for what we want to say. These are hypocritical statements, and these are liars that will say whatever they want. If they're willing to apply logic on one side but not the other in the same exact way, they're hypocrites. The double standard. This is an assumption based on correlation. And they'll choose to do that when they want and ignore it when they don't. These are liars, people. All across the board. I just don't see how it can be any more clear. Went much longer than I wanted with that last part there, so I apologize for how long it went today. Most of you like that, I know, but the mask one was an important one to get into. I didn't want to rush through it necessarily. So that's, at the end of the day, guys, this whole thing is falling apart. It always has been. I mean, this has been falling apart since the very beginning. And now here we are, where it is just coming across. I mean, right now, they are beginning to dissipate their own illusion. But don't forget, this is not going to go away. They're not just going to go wake up one day and be like, okay, go back to what you were doing. This has been set. This is driving towards the Great Reset, the Internet of Things, the whole push. And the biosecurity state is the control mechanism around that. And they're driving it forward as we speak. So as we see this fall apart, we need to stand up and put our foot down and not allow this to go forward in any way, shape, or form. All of it, whether 5G or reimagining of our world around us or any kind of, we're going to do this to keep you safe from the next pandemic kind of narratives. It's all lies in regard to what they're really trying to accomplish. Time to push back, as always. I love you all. Thank you for being here. Question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.